Welcome back to another story on Watch Harry. This time, we're bringing you, Harry rejected the Gryffindor sword at sorting and ancient goblin law revealed he owned 5 Potter Lord rings. Your likes fuel our creativity. Subscribe and stay tuned. Here's the story. Chapter 1, The Hat offers a sword. The train had been moving for 3 hours before Harry figured out that the wizarding world had already decided who he was. It wasn't any single thing. It was the way people kept stopping in the corridor outside his compartment, not walking past, stopping, and craning their necks to look through the glass like he was an exhibit. It was the red-haired boy who'd asked if he could sit down and then spent 20 minutes not quite making eye contact. It was the blonde boy who'd walked in like he owned the floor and announced that Harry ought to be careful about who he made friends with, as though Harry's friendships were already matters of public record. It was the way everyone seemed to be waiting for him to perform something. Harry had learned patience the hard way, in a cupboard under a set of stairs, and he applied it now. He watched. He listened. He ate 2 chocolate frogs and read both the cards, Dumbledore and Morgan Le Fay, and said very little to Ron Weasley, who was a decent enough boy underneath all the gawking and who eventually relaxed enough to eat Harry's every flavor beans with the focused dedication of someone defusing a bomb. The girl who came in looking for a toad was named Hermione Granger, and she was the first person on the train who didn't seem interested in Harry Potter the legend. She was interested in Harry Potter the student, quizzed him about his spell work, looked faintly disappointed when he admitted he hadn't known he was a wizard until a month ago, and then rattled off a list of foundational texts he should have read by now with the brisk efficiency of someone who had been waiting her whole life for people to take learning seriously. Harry liked her immediately. He suspected she'd find that annoying if he told her, so he didn't. When she left, Ron pulled a face. "She's a bit much," he said. "She's the first person today who talked to me like I was a person," Harry said pleasantly. Ron didn't have a response to that. He went back to his chocolate frog. The boats were cold and the lake was black and absolutely massive, and Harry sat in the prow of a boat with Neville Longbottom, who was gripping the sides with both hands and staring straight ahead with the expression of someone who had survived worse and was not going to let a lake be the thing that finished him. Harry didn't know anything about Neville yet except that he'd lost his toad and that he moved through the world braced for something to go wrong. Harry recognized that. He knew exactly what it felt like to move through the world that way. "It's not that deep," Harry said. Neville looked at him sideways. "How do you know?" "I don't," Harry said. "But saying it helps." Neville thought about this for a moment. Then something in his shoulders dropped about half an inch, which for Neville, Harry would eventually learn, was roughly equivalent to another person doing a full exhale and laughing. "I'm Neville," Neville said. "I know. You told me on the train." "I'm Harry." "I know," Neville said. "Everyone knows." "Everyone keeps telling me that," Harry said, watching the castle rise above the water, massive and lit and genuinely extraordinary, towers catching moonlight and throwing it back in silver fragments. He let himself feel it for exactly 3 seconds, the wonder of it, the sheer impossible reality of magic being real, and then tucked it away somewhere safe. "I'm starting to find it a bit threatening." Neville made a sound that might have been a laugh. It was a small sound, but it was there. The entrance hall was warm and enormous and smelled like wood smoke and old stone, and Professor McGonagall was exactly what Harry had expected from a woman whose name sounded like a weather event. She was tall and precise and her voice had the quality of a ruler across knuckles, not cruel, just absolutely uninterested in nonsense. She told them about the houses. Harry already knew about the houses. He'd read Hogwarts, a history on the train. Hermione Granger had loaned it to him with an expression suggesting she was doing him a significant personal favor. He knew about Gryffindor. He knew what people expected. The ghost incident happened, a collection of transparent figures drifting through the wall in a cheerful mob, and everyone jumped except Harry, who was watching Professor McGonagall's face, which did not move at all. The ghosts drifted away arguing about something. McGonagall said, "Follow me," and led them into the Great Hall. Harry had thought he was prepared for it. He wasn't, quite. The ceiling opened up into the night sky, not a painting of it, not a replica, the actual sky, stars burning cold and clear above 4 long tables of students who all turned to look at the same moment. The candles floated in their hundreds. The enchanted ceiling rippled slightly as a breeze Harry couldn't feel moved through it. He looked at it for 2 full seconds. Then he looked at the staff table. Dumbledore sat at the center of it, white-bearded and twinkling, and his eyes found Harry immediately with the particular warmth of someone greeting a guest they'd been expecting for a very long time. Harry met his gaze and held it and felt, very distinctly, that the warmth in those eyes was real and the calculation underneath it was also real, and that both could be true simultaneously about a person. He'd learned that from the Dursleys, who had occasionally been kind when it cost them nothing, and from his primary school headmistress, who had liked him and still handed him back to the Dursleys every afternoon. He looked away first. Not because it was strategic. Because he was done. The Sorting Hat sat on a stool in front of the staff table looking ancient and filthy and frankly disappointing, until it opened what appeared to be a mouth torn in the brim and sang. Harry had read about the song. He hadn't expected it to be so specific, not just listing virtues but describing something older, something about the founding, something almost like a warning, though he couldn't have said what it was warning against. Abbott, Hannah. The hat barely touched Hannah Abbott's head before it shouted Hufflepuff. The Hufflepuff table cheered. Harry stood in the line of first years and waited and watched. The hat took varying amounts of time, some placements were instant, some stretched into the silences that made the watching students shift in their seats. He tried to work out the pattern. He couldn't, quite. Granger was placed in Gryffindor in about 4 seconds flat, which seemed about right. Neville Longbottom's sorting took nearly 2 minutes and ended in Gryffindor, and Neville walked to the table looking faintly surprised to have survived it. Potter, Harry. The hall went very quiet in a very particular way. Not the ordinary quiet of attention, something charged, almost electric. Harry walked to the stool. Professor McGonagall lifted the hat. Their eyes met briefly and Harry thought he saw something in hers that wasn't quite professional neutrality, something more careful than that, more complex. She settled the hat onto his head and it dropped over his eyes and the world went dark. "Well," said the hat, and its voice was directly inside his skull, dry and ancient and genuinely curious. "This is unexpected." "What is?" Harry thought. "You're aware. Most of them aren't, at 11. They think so, but the difference between awareness and the performance of awareness is rather significant, and yes, you understand that distinction." A pause. The hat seemed to be doing something Harry could feel at the edges of his mind, not an intrusion exactly, more like a hand placed flat against a door to feel whether anything was on the other side. Courage, certainly. Loyalty, underneath the independence. Intelligence, considerable, actually, given how little formal education you've had. Cunning, although you'd be surprised how few Slytherins I've sorted actually had it in any real depth. Ambition. And something else. Something, what? Harry thought. Old, the hat said, and it sounded almost surprised. There's something very old in you, Harry Potter. Now. I wonder if you'll appreciate this. Something changed. It wasn't a sound or a vision, it was a sensation, somewhere between weight and warmth, at the edges of his perception. Like something very large turning to look at him. There is a sword, the hat said quietly, that belongs to this house. It has been waiting. Waiting for someone of sufficient worth. I can offer it to you now, as it has been offered before, and you would take your place as the truest heir Gryffindor has seen since the founder's line. The house would claim you. The sword would be yours. You would be the boy who lived in all the ways they want you to be, and I think you know exactly what that means. Harry thought about the train. The corridor full of people craning their necks. The blonde boy with his pre-packaged contempt. Dumbledore's eyes finding him like a lighthouse beam, warm and inexorable. He thought about the word claim. What if I don't want it? He thought. The hat was very still for a moment. Nobody has ever, in 1012 years of sortings, refused a sword. Well, Harry thought. Now someone has. Do you understand what you're doing? I'm saying no to something I didn't ask for. That seems fairly straightforward. The magical implications can sort themselves out. No. I don't want the sword as an offer. I don't want to be claimed. If the sword is mine because I earned it, it'll still be mine tomorrow. If it's mine because Gryffindor House decided to adopt me for their purposes, it can stay in the vault. A long pause. Then the hat made a sound Harry could only describe as a laugh, dry and ancient and not unkind. You know, it said, you do well in Slytherin. The thinking, the patience, the absolutely unilateral decision-making. But I notice you already know that. I read the history. You read the implications of the history. That's not the same thing. I ask again, and I mean this genuinely, not as a formality, where shall I put you? Harry thought. He thought about Gryffindor, the expectations, the sword offer, the immediate political weight of being sorted into the Founder's house when half the magical world already thought they owned him. He thought about Ravenclaw, which appealed to him more than he'd admitted, but which felt too quiet for what he suspected the next few years were going to require. He thought about Hufflepuff, which he didn't dismiss the way the other students seemed to. And he thought about Slytherin. He thought about being put somewhere nobody expected, somewhere the rules were already different, where he'd have to build every relationship from scratch without anyone deciding what they felt about him before he'd opened his mouth. He thought about Draco Malfoy's face when he'd said you'll soon find that some wizarding families are better than others, the absolute confidence of someone who had never had his assumptions questioned. That seemed like something worth disrupting. Slytherin, Harry thought. Slytherin. The hat shouted. The silence that followed was so total and so sudden that Harry could hear the candle flames hissing in their brackets. He lifted the hat from his head and set it back on the stool and looked out at the hall and watched, with a kind of detached interest, as the Great Hall of Hogwarts collectively failed to process what had just happened. The Gryffindor table looked like they'd been told Christmas was cancelled. Ron Weasley's mouth was open. Hermione Granger's expression went through approximately 6 phases in 2 seconds, surprise, confusion, rapid recalculation, and something that looked almost like reassessment. The Slytherin table was very quiet in a different way, not shocked, but alert, like a group of people who had just seen something land on the board and weren't sure yet if it was an asset or a threat. Draco Malfoy was staring at Harry with an expression that Harry was genuinely unable to read, which was interesting in itself. At the staff table, Dumbledore was still smiling. But his eyes had changed. The warmth was still there, but the calculation was closer to the surface now, less comfortable, less certain. He looked like a man who had been holding a very detailed map and had just discovered the territory was different. McGonagall's face betrayed nothing. Her quill was moving across parchment. But her jaw was set in a way that suggested she was working very hard to keep it that way. Harry walked to the Slytherin table. He sat down between 2 older students who moved aside for him without speaking. The Slytherin applause was measured, not cold exactly, but considered, the way you applaud something you're still evaluating. A second-year girl to his left leaned over and said, in a low, careful voice, "Well, that's either the smartest thing anyone's done in this hall in 20 years or the most catastrophic." "I'm comfortable with both," Harry said. She looked at him for a moment, then smiled, a quick, genuine thing, there and gone. "Gemma Farley. Prefect. Welcome to Slytherin." The sorting finished. Neville caught Harry's eye across the hall and gave him a helpless sort of look, not accusatory, just bewildered. Harry shrugged one shoulder, and Neville laughed, suddenly and briefly, like it surprised him. The feast appeared and Harry ate and listened and watched. The conversation around him was quiet and oblique in a way that Gryffindor's table, 40 feet away and running at full volume, definitely was not. Slytherins, Harry noted, talked in layers. The surface conversation was perfectly pleasant and entirely uninformative. The real exchange was happening in the pauses, the glances, the small precise adjustments of tone. It was a language he recognized without having ever been taught it. He'd learned something like it at the Dursleys, where the thing being said and the thing being meant were never the same. He ate and filed things away and let people think they were observing him while he observed them back. Draco Malfoy sat 4 places down and did not look at Harry for the entire meal, which was the most attentive form of watching Harry had encountered yet. After the feast, the first years were led by a prefect down to the dungeons, down and further down, until the stone walls sweated moisture and the torches were further apart and the air tasted of cold water and old magic. The Slytherin common room revealed itself behind a stretch of blank stone wall that responded to a whispered password, and Harry stepped inside and thought, yes, actually. He'd expected cold. It was warm, in the way that deep underground spaces are warm, kept temperature, insulated by stone, with fires burning green-tinged in the hearths. The furniture was dark and heavy and old. The windows, and there were windows, somehow, looked out into the black water of the lake, and something large and slow was moving out there in the dark, casting shadows on the glass. The room was full of low light and the particular silence of a place that has been accumulating secrets for 1,000 years. Harry found it extremely comfortable. The prefect, a composed, handsome 6th year named Marcus Flint, gave them the introductory speech. Rules. Expectations. The unifying principle that Slytherin's loyalty was to Slytherin first, to each other second, and to everyone else at whatever level was strategically sensible. He said it without apology. Harry appreciated that. He'd had a lifetime of people being dishonest about their priorities. He was assigned a dormitory, 4 beds, 4 trunks, stone walls with tapestries in green and silver, and his 3 roommates were Draco Malfoy, a thick-set and silent boy named Vincent Crabbe, and a thoughtful-looking boy named Theodore Nott who was reading a book when Harry arrived and did not look up. Draco was arranging things in his trunk with unnecessary precision. He did not say anything until Harry had sat on his bed and started pulling off his shoes, and then he said, still looking at his trunk, "Why?" "Why what?" Harry said. "Don't do that," Draco said, and there was no heat in it, just precision. "You know exactly what I'm asking." Harry thought about lying or deflecting and decided both were boring. "Because Gryffindor was going to turn me into a symbol," he said. "I've been a symbol since I was 1 year old. I'm tired of it." Draco turned from his trunk. His expression was still the one Harry hadn't been able to read in the hall, not hostile now, closer to something like genuine engagement. "And Slytherin won't?" "Slytherin will try to use me for something else," Harry said. "That's different. At least it'll be interesting." "You're either remarkably perceptive or completely naive," Draco said. "I haven't decided which." "Let me know when you figure it out," Harry said, and pulled out Hogwarts, a history and went back to the chapter on Goblin-Wizard relations, which he'd marked on the train with a bit of parchment because something in it had snagged on something else in his memory and he wanted to know what. Draco stared at him for another 3 seconds. Then he went back to his trunk. Theodore Nott, from behind his book, made a very small sound that Harry was fairly certain was amusement. Harry found the passage he was looking for, a dense paragraph on the 3rd page of the chapter, the sort of paragraph that history books bury important things in because they don't want you to actually read them. It was about Goblin inheritance recognition protocols. About how Gringotts maintained its own legal framework parallel to the Ministry's, older than the Ministry, with its own definitions of ownership, claim, and succession. And there was a line, just one line, dry and apparently minor, about how Goblin law recognized the formal refusal of a magical offer as a significant legal act, particularly in matters of inheritance and lordship. A wizarding heir who refuses a formal magical claim made on behalf of a blood legacy does not forfeit that legacy. Under the Accord of Ragnarok I, such a refusal triggers a mandatory account review under Goblin oversight, irrespective of any standing guardianship arrangements. Harry read it twice. Then he thought about what the hat had said. There is a sword that belongs to this house. The house would claim you. He thought about the word guardianship. He thought about a vault that had been opened when he was 11 years old that should have been opened when he was 11 years old, and whether or not anyone had checked what was in it before he'd arrived. He thought about the Dursleys, who had been paid to keep him. He'd been told that as a throwaway line by Hagrid, not harshly, just matter-of-factly, Dumbledore arranged everything, and he'd filed it away and not examined it too closely because there'd been too much else to process. He thought about it now. He lay back on his bed in the Slytherin dungeon with the lake pressing black and cold against the windows and something ancient in the stone humming very quietly at the edges of his awareness, and he thought about all of it. Then he blew out his candle and went to sleep, because there was nothing to be done about it tonight, and he'd learned a long time ago that catastrophizing in the dark was a waste of energy better spent on tomorrow. He slept better than he had in years. He wasn't sure what to make of that. In the morning, Hogwarts was different in daylight, less vast, somehow, more textured and specific, full of moving staircases and portraits that had opinions and doors that weren't doors and windows that looked out onto views that geometrically shouldn't have existed. Harry navigated it with the focused calm of someone who had learned to read environments quickly, following the map in his Hogwarts, a history with one eye and the actual castle with the other, finding the gaps between where the book said things were and where they actually were, noting doors that corresponded to nothing in any official plan. He was looking for something in particular, and he found it before breakfast, a small notice board in a corridor off the 3rd floor, dust-covered and half-hidden behind a suit of armor, listing the hours and contact information for Gringotts representatives who visited Hogwarts. The next visit was Friday. 3 days away. Harry memorized the time and room number and went to breakfast. The Great Hall in the morning was looser and louder than it had been the night before, students had relaxed back into themselves, and the strangeness of the previous evening had settled into something more manageable. Harry sat at the Slytherin table and ate toast and felt the hall's attention on him like a weather system, not constant, but recurring, pulses of awareness sweeping back to him from various directions every few minutes. He caught Hermione Granger's eye across the hall. She was at the Gryffindor table between two girls he didn't know yet, and she was looking at him with the expression she'd had the night before, the rapid recalculation one. He raised an eyebrow. She lifted her chin fractionally, not acknowledgement exactly, but not a dismissal either. More like, I haven't finished thinking about this. That seemed reasonable. Neville gave him a small wave from further down the Gryffindor table, the kind of wave that was trying not to draw too much attention to itself. Harry waved back without trying to hide it, and felt several Slytherins register this with varying degrees of strategic interest. The schedules arrived with the post. Harry looked at his and noted, potions with Gryffindor, transfiguration with Gryffindor, herbology with Hufflepuff. He would see a lot of Gryffindor. He found this more entertaining than concerning. First class was transfiguration, and Professor McGonagall walked in exactly on time, placed a beetle on her desk, and turned into a cat in the time it took most students to find their quills. Harry was already watching when it happened. He'd sat in the front row, which no one else seemed to want, and he thought it was the most elegant thing he'd seen since arriving at Hogwarts. Not the magic itself, though the magic was extraordinary. The control of it. The absolute economy of movement, not a single gesture wasted. McGonagall transformed back, adjusted her glasses, and looked at the class with the precise containment of someone who is used to making an impression and considers it a professional responsibility to maintain standards. Transfiguration, she said, is among the most complex and dangerous branches of magic taught at Hogwarts. Anyone who engages in foolish wand-waving in this classroom will leave. That includes, and her eyes swept the class with the very clear subtext of especially, those of you who may be laboring under the impression that fame is a substitute for competence. Harry felt several sets of eyes flick to him. He looked at McGonagall and kept his expression neutral. She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds. Something moved through hers, not hostility, something less comfortable. Assessment, maybe. Or concern. We'll begin with the theory, she said, and turned to the board. By the end of the lesson, Harry had successfully turned his match into a needle, fully silver, sharp, properly shaped, while most of the class was still managing partial transformations. McGonagall came to his desk, examined the needle, looked at him again with that same complex expression, and said, "Good," in a tone that clearly meant more than the word. He didn't know yet what she knew. He wouldn't for a few more days. But he noticed that she watched him differently from the others, not with the hall's generalized celebrity fascination, but with something more specific. The way you watched something when you knew what it was and were waiting to see if it knew too. Flying lessons wouldn't start for another few weeks. Harry thought that was probably for the best. He suspected flying lessons were going to cause a scene, and he wanted to have a better grip on the Gringotts situation before he started being publicly exceptional at things. On Tuesday, a note came to him during dinner. No school owl. The parchment was heavy, cream-colored, embossed at the top with a Gringotts seal. It had been slipped under his goblet while he was looking at his charms notes, which meant either it had been delivered by someone at the table or it had appeared, which was a kind of magic Harry hadn't encountered yet. He kept his expression neutral and read it under the table. Mr. H. J. Potter, Lord Potter, Gringotts Bank has registered a formal inheritance protocol trigger under the Accord of Ragnarok I. This trigger has been activated by the refusal of a recognized magical offer made on behalf of a blood legacy, registered September 1st, evening session, Hogwarts, Scotland. A full account audit has been initiated. Your presence at the Hogwarts representative office at your earliest convenience is strongly requested. This matter is not subject to the oversight of the Ministry of Magic, Hogwarts administration, or any standing guardianship arrangement. This invitation requires no permission beyond your own. Account Manager Griphook, Gringotts Bank, London. Harry folded the note carefully and tucked it into his charms book. He ate the rest of his dinner. He contributed 3 observations to a conversation about the vanishing cabinet someone had apparently broken on the 4th floor. He went back to the dormitory, lay on his bed, stared at the stone ceiling while the lake light shifted green-black on the walls, and let himself feel, just for a moment, the particular shape of the thing he was standing on the edge of. Lord Potter, the note had said. Not Mr. Potter. Not even the boy who lived, which he'd have expected from a form letter. Lord Potter. He thought about the vault he'd visited with Hagrid. The mountain of gold. The thought he'd had but not finished having, the thought about whether anyone had checked what was in it before he'd arrived. He thought about Dumbledore's face when the hat had shouted Slytherin. The warmth still there, but the certainty fractured. He thought about the word guardianship, and what it meant that Gringotts had specified the audit was not subject to any standing guardianship arrangement. Someone had set themselves up as his guardian. Someone who had access to his vaults. Someone who had made decisions about his life from before he could walk. He was not angry about this. Anger was a reaction. He needed something more deliberate than a reaction. He needed information. Thursday came, 2 days ahead of the scheduled Gringotts representative visit, but Harry had sent a brief, polite note asking if an earlier appointment was possible. The reply had come back within an hour, on the same heavy cream parchment, tomorrow. 10 o'clock. Room 3C, 3rd corridor, East Wing. Griphook. Harry arranged with the helpful Gemma Farley to have his Friday morning free period without attracting notice. Slytherins, he was discovering, were extremely good at the logistics of things they weren't supposed to be doing. He didn't explain what he was doing. He simply said he had a bank appointment and she simply said, 1st floor bathroom, 3rd door, it'll let you out near the East Wing, and left it at that, with the serene competence of someone who had been routing around institutional obstacles since she was 12. Room 3C was small and wood-paneled and smelled like formal occasions, with a single desk and 2 chairs that were not quite the right size for a wizard, being slightly low to the ground in the Goblin way. Behind the desk was Griphook. Harry had met Griphook once, for approximately 4 minutes, on the cart ride to Vault 713. He remembered sharp eyes and a precise quality of attention and the particular dignity of someone who was doing you a service and making sure you understood it was a service and not an obligation. Griphook looked at him now the way you looked at a mathematical problem that had just rearranged itself into something more interesting. Harry sat down. The door closed on its own. A privacy ward snapped into place with a sound like a key in a lock. "Mr. Potter," Griphook said. "Griphook," Harry said. He hadn't added a title. He'd thought about it and decided that the appropriate response to someone treating you with professional respect was professional respect in return, not the false warmth of Mr. Griphook, which everyone said and nobody meant. Griphook's eyes sharpened fractionally. "You know my name. We met last summer," Harry said. "You drove the cart. I drove many carts last summer." "You remember mine," Harry said. A pause. "Yes," Griphook said. "I do." He folded his long fingers on the desk. "You refused the Sword of Gryffindor." "I refused an offer made on behalf of Gryffindor House," Harry said. "There's a distinction." "Yes," Griphook said, and something in his voice shifted, very slightly warmer, or perhaps simply more direct. "There is. And the fact that you understand that distinction is either a very good sign or a very complicated problem." He opened a folder on the desk, heavy parchment, dense with notations in a script Harry couldn't read. "Gringotts has completed a preliminary audit of all accounts and holdings associated with the name Potter. We have also, as required by the protocol, traced all lines of inheritance triggered by the refusal event." He looked up. "Mr. Potter, I must ask, how much do you know about your family?" "Very little," Harry said. "Which I suspect is deliberate." "It is," Griphook said without inflection. He placed a single sheet of parchment on the desk and turned it to face Harry. Harry looked at it. It was a family tree, but not the kind that started with grandparents. This one went back, far back, names blurring into a history he didn't know yet, lines branching and converging and some of them marked with small symbols he didn't recognize. At the bottom, at the end of 5 separate descending lines, each marked with a different symbol in Goblin script, Harold James Potter. Harry stared at it for a long moment. 5, he said. 5, Griphook confirmed. House Potter. House Peveril. House Gryffindor, yes, as you have apparently intuited. House Slytherin. And House Ravenclaw. He said them with the even tone of someone delivering facts, but his eyes were watchful. Each carries a lordship. Each carries assets, properties, magical artifacts, and certain, political entitlements. Each has been legally dormant pending recognition. He paused. Under Goblin law, you have been lord of all 5 since the night your parents died. Under the Ministry's considerably less rigorous system, you have been a ward. A ward, Harry said, of someone who has access to my vaults. Your vault, Griphook said carefully. Singular. The trust vault established for your school expenses. The full Potter vault, along with the vaults associated with the 4 additional lordships, have been sealed pending recognition. They have not been drained. Another pause, heavier. However, there are certain disbursements from the trust vault that Gringotts is not able to account for. Payments made to a Muggle family, the Dursleys, Harry said. Over a period of 10 years. These payments were authorized under a guardianship instrument signed by Dumbledore, Harry said. Griphook stopped. He looked at Harry for a long, still moment. You're not surprised, he said. I'm very surprised, Harry said. I just don't see the point of showing it. He looked at the family tree again. The 5 lines descending to his name. Peveril. Gryffindor. Slytherin. What does it mean? The 5 lordships. Practically. In terms of, what I can actually do. Griphook allowed himself a very small expression that might, in a goblin, have been satisfaction. He reached into his folder and produced 5 more sheets of parchment. "Shall we begin?" he said. And Harry, who was 11 years old and completely unafraid, leaned forward and said, "Yes." Chapter 2. What the Goblins remember. The 5 sheets of parchment were not arranged in order of importance. Harry worked that out within the first 10 minutes. Griphook laid them out and let Harry look at them, and Harry looked at them and then looked at the order they'd been placed in and understood that the order was a test. Not a hostile one. More like the way a craftsman might hand you an unfamiliar tool to see which end you picked up first. He rearranged them. Peveril at the top. Then Gryffindor and Slytherin side by side. Then Ravenclaw. Then Potter at the bottom. Griphook looked at the new arrangement for a moment. "Explain your reasoning." "Peveril is the oldest. Everything else is downstream of it. Gryffindor and Slytherin are parallel, they're both founder lines and they probably have the most political weight right now, so they need to be understood together. Ravenclaw is the one with the most I don't know yet, the maternal line, which means there's something that was deliberately obscured." Harry tapped the Potter sheet. "And Potter is last because it's the one everyone thinks they already understand, which means it's the one most worth examining carefully." Griphook was quiet for a moment. Outside, somewhere beyond the privacy ward, the castle was going about its morning, distant footsteps, a door swinging shut, the muffled sound of a lesson starting down the corridor. "In 900 years of these conversations," Griphook said finally, "I have never had one begin this way." "How do they usually begin?" "With the wizard looking at the gold total and asking how quickly they can spend it." Harry looked at him steadily. "What's the gold total?" "Considerable." "Right. We can come back to that." He looked at the Peveril sheet. The notations were dense, half in Goblin script and half in an archaic English that he could follow roughly if he went slowly. "Tell me about Peveril." Griphook settled back in his chair with the air of someone who had been waiting, for quite some time, for someone to ask the right question. "The Peveril line," he explained, "was older than Gringotts itself, which meant it was older than the current arrangement of magical Britain, older than the Ministry, older than the Hogwarts founding. 3 brothers, a legend Harry half remembered from a children's book he'd once found at a school jumble sale, the tale of the 3 brothers, a story about death and 3 objects and the choices you made when power was offered." He'd assumed it was exactly that, a story. An allegory. "The Hallows are real," Harry said, "not quite a question." "Gringotts has documentation of all 3, Griphook said. "The stone is unlocated at present. The wand has been moving through various hands for several centuries and is currently in the possession of Albus Dumbledore, who acquired it in 1945. He said acquired with a precision that suggested he had opinions about how that acquisition had occurred. The cloak is listed as a Potter family heirloom. It was removed from the primary vault and placed in personal possession, he checked the notation, on the night of November 1, 1981. "Dumbledore has my cloak," Harry said. "He has been holding it," Griphook said. "Under the guardianship instrument. Whether it was his to hold is, a pause, a matter Gringotts has flagged." Harry filed that away. He'd deal with the cloak. "Not now." "The stone, does it matter?" "That it's unlocated?" "The stone is the hallow of resurrection. Its practical applications are," Griphook considered his words, "a matter of historical catastrophe every time someone has managed to locate it. Its importance to your inheritance is primarily symbolic. The Peveril lordship does not depend on possession of all 3 hallows. But the wand does matter. The Elder Wand," Griphook said, "is the most powerful wand in existence and it is currently in the hands of the man who controls your guardianship, your living arrangements, your access to your own family history, and your positioning within the wizarding world." He said it very neutrally. "Make of that what you will." Harry made quite a lot of it. He kept his expression level and moved on. Gryffindor. The Gryffindor line was cleaner, direct patrilineal descent, the kind of thing that should have been common knowledge and wasn't, because someone had done a fairly thorough job of burying it in the Ministry's genealogical records approximately 60 years ago. Griphook did not speculate about who or why. He simply presented the documentation, the lineage, the dates, the records that showed Harry's great-great-grandmother on the Potter side had been born Alara Gryffindor, last of the collateral founders line, who had married a Potter and whose children had been registered under the Potter name without noting the maternal house. Could someone have done that deliberately? Harry asked. Registrations can be amended with sufficient ministry access, Griphook said. Whether this particular amendment was deliberate or administrative negligence, Gringotts cannot confirm. The slight inflection on cannot suggested Gringotts had strong suspicions and was choosing its words carefully. The sword, Harry said. The Sword of Gryffindor is listed as an asset of House Gryffindor. By refusing the hat's offer, which constituted a formal claim by Gryffindor House, and then being recognized as Lord Gryffindor under the audit, you now hold full and unambiguous ownership of the sword. Griphook looked at him. It does not currently reside in your vault. It is held in the headmaster's office at Hogwarts, under the assumption that it is school property. It's not school property. It is not, Griphook agreed, with a tone that Harry suspected was as close to warm as Griphook got. A formal notification of ownership has been prepared by Gringotts. It will be sent to Hogwarts administration at whatever time you specify. Not yet, Harry said. When I need it, I'll send it. He moved to the Slytherin sheet. Griphook watched him. You're not surprised. About Slytherin. I chose Slytherin because it made strategic sense, Harry said. Finding out I have a claim to the founder's line is clarifying. He scanned the sheet. The lineage here was more tangled. It ran through the Peveril line, a marriage recorded in 1212 between a Peveril daughter and a Slytherin grandson, the line passing forward through generations with the Slytherin name dropping away and surfacing again in different branches. Who knows about this? No one, currently, outside Gringotts. The records are sealed under Goblin confidentiality until you choose to act on them. Griphook paused. I should note that when this information becomes known, and under Goblin law, it will become known when you formally claim all 5 lordships, the political response will be significant. Define significant. Half the wizarding world will decide you're the most important person alive, Griphook said. The other half will decide you're a threat and act accordingly. He said it like it was a weather forecast. Factual. Unavoidable. Something to plan around. They already think the first one, Harry said. The second will just be interesting. Griphook made a sound. It was very small and very dry, and Harry was almost certain it was a laugh. Ravenclaw was the one that hit him somewhere unexpected. The documentation Griphook laid out for House Ravenclaw was different from the others, not just in the lineage, but in the presentation. The other sheets were formal, institutional. This one had an additional page attached, separate parchment, and Griphook's handwriting, small and precise, ran across the top in English rather than Goblin script. Note, Muggleborn classification applied in error. See attached. Harry looked up. Lily Evans, Griphook said, was registered as Muggleborn upon receiving her Hogwarts letter. Gringotts has documentation indicating this registration was incorrect. He was very still. She was a direct descendant of Helena Ravenclaw, known in the historical record as the Grey Lady of Hogwarts, through a line that passed into the Muggle world 3 generations prior and was not brought back into magical recognition. Harry put the parchment down carefully on the desk. My mother wasn't Muggleborn, he said. She was not, Griphook said. Her family had Muggleborn registered because they had no living magical relatives at the time of her letter, and the Ministry classification system does not account for dormant lineages. The registration was not falsified. It was simply, a pause, incomplete. Who would have known? Harry said. If anyone checked, the records at Gringotts were always accurate, Griphook said. We do not deal in incomplete information. However, Gringotts does not volunteer information to the Ministry or to Hogwarts. We deal in accounts and holdings and inheritance." He looked at Harry with the direct, unflinching attention that was Griphook's particular version of emphasis. Anyone who had sufficient access and sufficient reason to investigate the Evans family line could have found this. The records were never hidden. They were simply never requested. Harry sat with that for a moment. The stone walls of room 3C seemed very present, the weight of them, the age. The castle pressing in from all sides. His mother had been a Ravenclaw heir and nobody had told her. Or somebody had known and not told her. Or somebody had known and had very good reasons to prefer the world believing that Lily Evans was a remarkable Muggle-born witch rather than a separated branch of an ancient founder's line. He thought about what that changed, about the story everyone told about James and Lily Potter, the pure-blood wizard and his Muggle-born wife, the progressive love story that the wizarding world had turned into a mythology. He thought about what it meant that the mythology was built on something incomplete. He thought about Dumbledore, who knew everything, who had always known everything, who had placed Harry with the Dursleys and signed the guardianship instrument and sent Harry into this world as the boy who lived with a particular story already attached. "The Potter Vault," he said, and his voice was perfectly even. "You said there were disbursements you couldn't account for." "From the trust vault only," Griphook said. "To the Dursley family. 10 years of payments at a rate I can provide you in writing. The total is," he named a figure. It was not a small figure. Harry breathed through it. "Who authorized those payments?" "The guardianship instrument, signed by Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, names him as sole guardian with full access to the trust vault for purposes of your care and welfare." Griphook's voice was neutral as a stone floor. "The payments to the Dursley family were made as childcare disbursements." "He paid the Dursleys to keep me," Harry said. Not angrily. "Just naming it, the way you named something when you needed to be sure it was real." "He did. And he has been my guardian for 10 years, with access to my vault, and I was not informed of this at any point." "You were not. Is the guardianship instrument valid under Goblin law?" Griphook paused, the first real pause he'd taken, the first moment where something like hesitation entered the conversation. "Under Ministry law, it is formally valid. Dumbledore held legal magical guardianship." "Under Goblin law," Harry said again. "Under Goblin law," Griphook said carefully, "a lord of an ancient house cannot be placed under external guardianship without the explicit consent of the house's senior surviving members, a Goblin witnessed agreement, and the formal recognition of the ward. None of these conditions were met." Another pause. "Under the Accord of Ragnarok I, the same accord that triggered this audit, the guardianship instrument is unrecognized by Gringotts." "Meaning?" "Meaning Gringotts does not consider Albus Dumbledore to have had legal authority over your accounts, your holdings, or your person, under the law that predates and supersedes ministry jurisdiction in matters of ancient house inheritance." Griphook looked at him steadily. "Meaning, Mr. Potter, that as of this meeting and your formal acknowledgement of all 5 lordships, you are legally, under Goblin law, your own guardian." The room was very quiet. Harry was aware of the castle around him, the living, breathing impossibility of it, thousands of students and centuries of magic, and somewhere in it all a great many people who had very clear ideas about who Harry Potter was and what he was going to do with himself. He was aware of Dumbledore's office somewhere above him, the Sword of Gryffindor on the wall, the Elder Wand in a drawer, the whole architecture of a plan that Harry had been born into without being asked. He was 11 years old. He found he didn't particularly care about that detail. "Walk me through the formal acknowledgement," he said. "What does it involve? What are the consequences? What happens immediately and what happens over time?" Griphook produced more parchment. More notations. He was, Harry thought, the most efficient person he had met since arriving in the wizarding world, and the fact that he was a goblin and not a wizard seemed to bother everyone except the 2 of them. The formal acknowledgement of all 5 lordships required Harry to sign 5 separate documents in his own blood, not dramatically, just a small cut, a brief pain, the parchment absorbing the signature with a faint golden glow that faded to silver. With each signature, Harry felt something, not quite a sensation, more like an awareness, a new weight in the architecture of himself. Not heavy. Just there. Like walking into a room where the furniture has been rearranged and understanding, without looking, where everything now sat. House Potter. His father's line, and all the quiet dignity of a family that had mattered without needing to be loud about it. House Peveril. The oldest thing he'd ever touched, magic so deep and so settled that it felt less like an inheritance and more like a geological fact. This was in him regardless of the parchment. The parchment was just the world catching up. House Gryffindor. He thought about the sword. He thought about refusing it. He thought about the difference between being claimed and owning something outright, and felt, for the first time, genuinely fond of the choice he'd made 3 days ago on a stool in front of the entire school. House Slytherin. This one hummed when he signed it, a low, serpentine frequency that he felt more in his teeth than anywhere else. Something ancient and extremely awake, paying attention to him for the first time. He looked at the glow as it faded from the parchment and thought, yes, I know. I've been ignoring you too. House Ravenclaw. He held the quill over this one the longest. His mother's line. Helena Ravenclaw's blood running forward through the years, ending up in a woman who'd been told she was Muggle-born and had spent her whole life being extraordinary without knowing she was extraordinary in 2 different ways at once. He signed it and felt something that wasn't magic and wasn't logic, just grief, clean and specific, the way grief was when you let yourself feel it properly instead of around the edges. He put the quill down. Griphook was looking at him with an expression that wasn't quite respect. Goblins had their own version of it, something more like recognition, one craftsman acknowledging another. The lordships are formally acknowledged under Goblin law, Griphook said. Gringotts will send formal notification to the Ministry of Magic within the standard 30-day window. You may specify whether you wish this expedited or delayed. Delayed, Harry said immediately. The full 30 days. As you prefer. Griphook made a notation. The 5 primary vaults are now accessible to you. The combined holdings are substantial. I can provide a full accounting. Send it to me. In writing. To the school, marked personal. He thought for a moment. Can Dumbledore intercept mail addressed to me? The headmaster has historically been able to flag certain incoming correspondence, Griphook said. However, a communication from Gringotts under active inheritance proceedings carries a privacy seal that cannot be broken without the account holder's explicit permission. To break it would be a violation of the accord. He paused. To break it would be, under Goblin law, an act of theft. Good, Harry said. Send everything under that seal. There is one more matter, Griphook said. He reached into the folder and produced a final piece of parchment, different from the rest, older, the edges irregular, the text in an archaic hand that was several centuries out of date. This is a copy of a document found in the Peveril Vault. Gringotts retrieved it from the primary archive as part of the mandatory audit. It predates all current ministry records. He turned it toward Harry. It is a blood ward specification, written in the hand of Antioch Peveril, the eldest brother. It describes a magical protection that can be anchored in a willing sacrifice, specifically between a parent and a child. The protection passes through the Peveril line. Harry looked at the parchment. He couldn't read most of it. But he could read the word at the top, written in the archaic script but still recognizable, Sacrificium. My mother's death, he said. The magic that protected you on the night of October the 31st, 1981, Griphook said, was not an accident of Lily Potter's love, as the wizarding world has chosen to describe it. It was Peveril magic, ancient and specific, activated by willing sacrifice and anchored in her blood. He was very careful. It is still active. And it is, under the terms of the original specification, he tapped the parchment, yours. A protection that belongs to you, that no one can redirect or exploit without your explicit knowledge. Harry stared at the parchment for a long time. Dumbledore anchored it to my aunt, he said slowly. The blood protections at the Dursleys, he told someone, Hagrid maybe, that I was protected as long as I could call the Dursleys' place home. He redirected an active Peveril ward, Griphook said, and his voice was very level, without the account holder's knowledge or consent, to a location and a family of his own choosing. He let that sit in the air. Whether the redirection was valid under the ward's original terms is a question Gringotts has referred to our Magical Contracts Division. The preliminary assessment is, a pause that told Harry everything, it was not. So the ward might not have worked the way Dumbledore thought it did. Or worked differently. Or might have been doing something else entirely while everyone believed they understood it. Harry stood up. He straightened his robes. He felt the 5 signatures still in him, still settling, still finding their positions in whatever architecture had just been rearranged. Griphook, he said. I want to be straightforward with you. Griphook looked at him. Goblins and wizards have a long history of not trusting each other, and from what I can tell, wizards have given goblins substantially more reasons for that than the other way around. I have no interest in continuing that tradition. He met the goblin's eyes directly. I don't know enough yet to know what I need. But I know I need an account manager who will tell me the truth rather than what's convenient, and who will act in my interests rather than in the interests of whoever has been acting in my interests without my knowledge. He paused. Is that something you can do? The silence stretched for a moment. Outside, the muffled sounds of the castle continued, footsteps, a distant bell, the castle's ordinary morning proceeding without him. I have managed the Potter account for 11 years, Griphook said, under instructions I was not comfortable with but was legally bound to follow. His voice was precise. I made very careful records of everything during those 11 years. Harry held his gaze. Then we understand each other. We do, Griphook said, and this time Harry was certain it was a smile, in the specific, limited way that Griphook smiled. I will send the full accounting under the Accord seal. And I will flag anything that requires your immediate attention. Harry nodded and turned toward the door, and then stopped. One more thing, he said. The cloak. Can Gringotts formally claim it as a Potter Vault asset? File the paperwork? We can note its status as misplaced collateral from the primary vault, Griphook said. The formal recovery claim would go through standard channels. Do that, Harry said. Don't rush it. But get it on record. He left room 3C and walked back into the castle, and it felt, very slightly, like walking into a different building than the one he'd left. Nothing had changed about the stone or the paintings or the floating staircases. Everything had changed about what he knew. He had a free period remaining. He spent it in the library. Not the restricted section, not yet, though he was already forming a list. The regular library was quite sufficient for what he needed right now, which was context. He wanted to understand the political landscape of the wizarding world, not as it had been explained to him, you know who, the war, brave heroes, tragic death, boy who lived, but as it actually functioned. The power structures. The old families. The Wizengamot and its composition and the way voting power was distributed. He found what he needed in 3 books he pulled without appearing to rush, settled at a corner table with his back to the wall where he could see the whole room, and read for 45 minutes. What he found was this: the Wizengamot had 50 seats. Of those 50, 23 were hereditary seats attached to ancient houses. Of those 23, 5 were currently being held in proxy by Dumbledore, because the houses they belonged to had no recognized lord to claim them. Harry did the math. House Potter. House Peveril. House Gryffindor. House Slytherin. House Ravenclaw. 5 seats. Held in proxy. By Albus Dumbledore, who was also Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot, which meant he presided over the body he was simultaneously the plurality voter in. Harry sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling of the library, which was less dramatic than the great hall ceiling but had its own quiet grandeur. He thought about the word guardianship again, and how many different shapes it could take. He thought about a chessboard, and about pieces that thought they were players. He gathered his books, returned them to their shelves in the precise order he'd found them, and walked back to the dungeons. Theo Knott was in the dormitory reading, which was where Theo Knott seemed to spend most of his time. He looked up when Harry came in, registered Harry's expression, and looked back at his book. "Good morning," Theo said, in a tone that made it clear he already knew the answer was more complicated than the question. "Informative," Harry said, sitting on his bed and pulling out a piece of parchment. He began writing, not notes, a letter, to Gringotts, laying out 3 specific requests he'd thought of on the walk back. The cloak recovery filing. A query on the Elder Wand's ownership chain. A request for the full text of the Accord of Ragnarok I in English translation. Theo watched him write for a moment. "You went to Gringotts. There's a representative office on the East Wing." "I know," Theo said. "My father uses it." A pause. "Most of the old families do." Harry said, still writing. "My father," Theo said carefully, "will want to know what you found out." Harry looked up. Theodore Knott was 14 years old, no, 11, same as Harry, but with the eyes of someone who had grown up understanding that information was currency and that the people who controlled information controlled everything else. He wasn't threatening. He was just honest about the way things worked, and Harry found that, in the same way he'd found Slytherin generally, more refreshing than alarming. "Tell your father," Harry said, "that the accounts are being audited, the lordships have been recognized, and Harry Potter is paying close attention. That's true, it's not dangerous to him specifically, and it'll stop him from speculating in directions that might make things complicated." He paused. "Unless your father's plans specifically require me to be ignorant of my own inheritance." Theo regarded him. "I genuinely don't know the answer to that yet." "Fair," Harry said. "Let me know when you do." Theo went back to his book. Harry finished his letters and sealed them with the Gringotts seal Griphook had given him, a small disc of bronze that pressed the Goblin script into warm wax, and left them on his desk for the morning post. At dinner, the Gryffindor table had a particular energy, the kind that meant something had happened, some piece of information was moving through the rumor network at speed. Harry noticed it from his position at the Slytherin table and spent about 3 minutes tracking the direction of looks and whispers before he identified the source, Percy Weasley, the third-year Gryffindor prefect, who was talking to Ron Weasley with the compressed urgency of someone delivering news they found both important and upsetting. Ron kept looking over at the Slytherin table. At Harry specifically. Harry ate his shepherd's pie and waited. After dinner, in the entrance hall, Ron caught up with him. He was flushed and slightly out of breath, and he had the expression of someone who had been building up to something and had decided the building up was finished. "Is it true?" Ron said. "What specifically?" Harry said. That there's something with Gringotts," Percy heard from, "there's something about." Ron stopped and apparently decided to abandon the indirect approach. "Percy says someone in the ministry got a flag about an inheritance audit for the Potter account and he says it's big. He wouldn't tell me what." He looked at Harry with something that was more complicated than his usual gawking, something that had genuine concern in it, underneath the curiosity. "Are you okay?" Harry considered the question. "Yes," he said. "I'm fine. But something is happening." "Several things are happening," Harry said. "Most of them to do with the fact that my family has more history than anyone told me." He looked at Ron and made a decision, not fully trusting, not yet, but not dismissing either. "Your mum. Does she know much about old family law? The ancient houses, inheritance, that sort of thing?" Ron blinked at the question. "Yeah, actually. Mum knows loads about that kind of thing. She's always going on about, why? Because I might have some questions she could answer, and I'd like to get information from someone who doesn't have a reason to give me a specific version of it." He paused. "I don't mean that as a criticism of your family." "No, I know," Ron said, and he looked thoughtful rather than offended, which Harry counted as a good sign. "She'd probably, yeah, I reckon she'd talk to you. She likes," he stopped himself. "She'd like to help. That's what I meant to say." "Good," Harry said. "I'll let you know." He went back to the dungeons. Draco was in the common room rather than the dormitory, sitting with Pansy Parkinson and two other students Harry hadn't fully sorted yet, Blaise Zabini, who was quiet and watchful and reminded Harry somewhat of himself, and Daphne Greengrass, who had an elegant, cool precision that Harry suspected was mostly armor. Draco looked at him when he came in. Then very deliberately looked away and continued his conversation. Harry sat in a chair by the window. The lake pressed its dark and enormous weight against the glass, a slab of cold water and deeper shadows, and he felt, from somewhere in the back of his awareness, the faint serpentine hum of the Slytherin inheritance reacting to something in the water. He ignored it for now. He had 30 days before the Ministry found out. He had 30 days to understand his position, secure his assets, build his alliances, and decide what he wanted to do with the information that Albus Dumbledore, Chief Warlock, Supreme Mugwump, and the man who had defeated Grindelwald, had been holding 5 Wisengamot proxy votes that weren't his, managing Harry's money and living arrangements without legal Goblin-recognized authority, and sitting on the knowledge of Lily Potter's true heritage for reasons Harry had not yet determined. 30 days was enough. He'd learned to do a great deal with less time than he had. From the common room window, something large moved through the black water, slow, enormous, the giant squid that everyone treated as a novelty. Harry watched it pass and thought about size and patience and what it meant to move through a world that mostly ignored you until the moment you decided to be visible. Then he pulled out his charms textbook and did his homework, because he was 11 and had an essay due and some things were simply practical. Chapter 3, Lords Don't Ask Permission. The first 2 weeks of Hogwarts had a rhythm to them that Harry mapped quickly: classes, meals, the particular social weather of the corridors between, the way information moved through the castle like water finding the lowest point. He understood environments by watching them, and Hogwarts was an environment that rewarded watching. What he found, watching, was this: Hogwarts ran on assumption. Students assumed their house was their identity. Teachers assumed their subject was the most important one. Dumbledore assumed everything was proceeding according to plan. And everyone, without exception, assumed that Harry Potter was either a legend or a disappointment, depending on their house and their politics, and that the difference between the two was simply a matter of waiting to see which one he'd prove himself to be. Harry found assumptions useful. Useful the way a fog was useful: it limited what other people could see. He stopped hiding in it on a Tuesday in the second week of September. It started with potions. Snape's classroom was in the dungeons, colder than the rest of the castle and lit by low torches that turned everyone's face slightly skull-like. Snape himself moved through the room with a contained, deliberate energy, not threatening exactly, more like a pressure system, the specific atmosphere of a person who found most of the world inadequate and had made their peace with that a long time ago. Harry had read about Severus Snape before arriving, not from any official source, but from the way people avoided talking about him, which was always more informative than what people said directly. He knew about his father. He knew about the history. He sat at his bench with Theo Knott and had his equipment laid out in the correct order and his textbook open to the correct page before Snape entered, and he kept his expression neutral when Snape's opening monologue, delivered while walking in a slow circuit of the room without looking at anyone directly, reached its well-known destination. "Potter," Snape said. He was at the front of the room now, black robes pooling around him like a visual manifestation of his general outlook. "Our new celebrity." The class had the particular stillness of an audience waiting to see where a performance was going. Harry looked at Snape with the same level attention he gave everything. He was aware of what Snape was doing, the framing, the mockery dressed as curiosity, and he was aware that the expected responses were either sycophancy or embarrassment, and he was not going to provide either one. "Tell me," Snape said, the words precisely placed like stones across a stream, "what you would get if you added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood?" Harry thought about it. He'd read the chapter. He'd actually read the chapter, not skimmed it, because Harry read everything he was given completely and because he had learned that information had a way of becoming unexpectedly useful. "Draught of living death," he said. "One of the most powerful sleeping potions known to wizard kind." Snape was quiet for a moment. Not a surprised quiet, a recalibrating one. "Where would you look," he said, with slightly less certainty in his performance, "if I told you to find a bezoar?" "Stomach of a goat. Antidote to most poisons." Harry paused for exactly 1 second. "Though not all. The venomous Tentaculus toxin is resistant to bezoar treatment and requires a different approach." That information wasn't in the first-year text. Harry had read ahead. Something shifted in Snape's expression, a fractional adjustment, not warmth but possibly interest, the look of a man who had been expecting a blank wall and found a door instead. "What is the difference?" Snape said, his voice slightly lower, testing now rather than performing, "between monkshood and wolfsbane?" "They're the same plant," Harry said. "Also known as aconite. Highly toxic." The confusion between the names has caused at least 4 recorded potion fatalities since 1800. The classroom was very quiet. Even the Slytherins had stopped their low murmuring. Snape looked at Harry for a long, still moment. His expression was doing something complicated. Harry could see the effort of the containment, the professional mask doing its work against something underneath it that wasn't hostility and wasn't warmth and was, Harry thought, probably simply old and painful and none of Harry's business. "Adequate," Snape said, and moved on. After that, Snape still watched Harry in class the way he watched all students, with the comprehensive attention of someone who could not turn off their perception of competence or its absence. But he didn't mock him again. He didn't perform at Harry's expense. He just taught, and Harry listened and asked precise questions. And at the end of the 3rd week's lesson Snape set down his stirring rod and looked at Harry's potion and said, almost involuntarily, "You have your mother's instinct for this." Harry looked up. Snape had already turned away. He didn't follow it. Not yet. There was too much else to manage and Snape was his own complicated country that Harry would need to approach with considerably more information than he currently had. But he filed it carefully. The way Snape said mothers. The way it came out before he'd decided to say it. The corridor conversations were happening too. Harry moved through the castle with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who had decided where he was going, and people got out of the way, not because he demanded it, but because certainty had a specific gravity that crowds responded to. He said hello to Neville every morning at breakfast across the hall and Neville, who had been visibly waiting for the social cost of that association to manifest and finding that it didn't, had gradually started saying hello back with something approaching confidence. He had 3 conversations with Hermione Granger in the library over the course of 2 weeks, each one more substantive than the last. She had initially been suspicious of his choice to sit at the Slytherin table, not politically, but academically, with the concern of someone who'd read enough history to know what Slytherin's reputation meant. He hadn't defended the choice. He'd simply said, "Read the original Sorting Hat song from 1284. Not the modern version. The original. Then tell me what you think," and she'd gone away and come back 2 days later and sat down across from him and said, "You made a deliberate choice. You chose to go somewhere you'd have to build everything from scratch." And he'd said, "Didn't you?" And she'd looked at him with the particular sharpness of someone who is not used to being understood and said nothing for a moment, and then they'd gotten on with their respective homework. He liked her. She was sharp and honest and she worked hard with a kind of fierce pleasure that Harry recognized as someone who had found the one thing the world couldn't take from them. Draco Malfoy made his move on a Wednesday morning in the 3rd week. Harry had been expecting something. Draco was too intelligent and too aware of the political implications of Harry's presence in Slytherin to simply do nothing, and the careful, deliberate disregard he'd been maintaining was the behavior of someone building toward a position rather than someone disengaged. Harry had watched it and waited. It happened in the corridor outside Transfiguration. Harry was walking back from an early breakfast he'd taken to eating early, when the hall was quiet and he could think without the ambient weight of everyone's attention, and Draco was coming the other way with Crabbe and Goyle arranged behind him like furniture. "Potter," Draco said. Harry stopped. "Malfoy." Draco dismissed Crabbe and Goyle with a look, a trained, efficient gesture that spoke to exactly what kind of household he'd grown up in. They moved 10 feet away with the obedience of people who knew their role precisely. Draco looked at Harry with the expression he'd had the first night, not hostile, but fully engaged, the look of someone who had been thinking about this for a while. "I've been doing some research," Draco said. "I assumed," Harry said. "You chose Slytherin deliberately. Not because the hat pushed you there." "Yes. And Gringotts sent you a letter in the first week." Draco's voice was even. "My father has contacts. He knew about the audit flag within 2 days of it being filed. He doesn't know the details, but he knows the shape of it." He paused. "He thinks it's the Potter Lordship." "Among others," Harry said. Draco went still. It was a precise kind of stillness, the kind that came from learning to control your reactions rather than from not having them. "Multiple." How many?" Harry looked at him thoughtfully. Draco was sharp and politically aware and operating with his father's objectives running underneath his own, and Harry needed to know which one was driving before he decided how much to give. "Why does it matter to you?" he said. "Specifically to you, not your father." Something moved across Draco's face, a flicker of something genuine, quickly managed. "Because I'm going to spend the next 7 years in the same house as you," he said. "And I'd like to know whether you're a resource or a complication. Those aren't the only 2 options." "They are in my family's framework," Draco said, and there was something dry in it that wasn't quite self-aware but was edging toward it. Harry considered him. "Tell your father it's more than 1 lordship and less than 10 and that the specifics are confidential until the ministry notification period ends." He paused. "And tell your father that I'm aware of the proxy seat situation." Draco's composure cracked, just slightly, just for a moment, the way a very good mask slips when the person wearing it gets genuinely surprised. The Wiesengemot," Harry said pleasantly. "Ancient house seats. Proxy holders." He watched Draco put it together. Watched the moment when Draco understood the implication. The Malfoy family had their own Wiesengemot seat, a full, hereditary seat, not a proxy. Lucius Malfoy used it. And if Harry had just implied that Dumbledore was currently holding proxy seats that were about to revert, the political board was shifting in ways that Lucius Malfoy had not anticipated and that Draco was clearly only just beginning to calculate. "You could have kept that to yourself," Draco said carefully. "I could," Harry agreed. "Consider it a gesture of good faith." He started walking. "Have a good morning, Malfoy." Draco didn't say anything. Harry didn't look back. He heard Crabbe and Goyle fall back into formation behind Draco and then all of them moving in the opposite direction, and he turned the corner and found the corridor empty and let himself exhale once, completely, and then went to Transfiguration. McGonagall noticed. He wasn't sure what she noticed exactly, she was too careful to let her attention become obvious, but over the course of that 3rd week, Harry became aware that she watched him differently from the other students. Not with concern, not with the celebrity fascination of the hall. With something that looked like she was checking something against something else and finding that the 2 things didn't quite match. After Thursday's class, she asked him to stay behind. The other students filed out. Harry waited with his bag over one shoulder and his hands easy at his sides and his expression open, which was different from neutral. Neutral was a closed door, open was a door with all the furniture pulled back, nothing to trip over. McGonagall sat at her desk. She did not invite him to sit, which told him this was not going to be a comfortable conversation. "I received a notification from Gringotts," she said. "As deputy headmistress." "About the audit?" Harry said. "About the lordship acknowledgements." She looked at him, the sharp, comprehensive look she had when she was seeing through the performance of a thing to the thing itself. "You signed the documents last Friday. You're 11 years old." "Yes," Harry said. "Is there a minimum age requirement under the Accord of Ragnarok I?" A pause. "No," she said. "There isn't." "Then the documents are valid." "Harry." She used his first name with a precision that wasn't warmth exactly but was something adjacent to it, the particular way you addressed a student you were genuinely concerned about rather than simply managing. "The notification includes the number of lordships acknowledged." 5. "Yes. You understand what that means. Politically. The implications for Dumbledore," Harry said. "The proxy seats." "Yes." He kept his voice level. "I understand." McGonagall was quiet for a long moment. She looked at her desk, at the precise stack of essays, the inkwell exactly centered, the details of a person who maintained order because order was the thing that held everything else together, and then back at him. "The headmaster doesn't know yet," she said. "The notification goes to Hogwarts administration," Harry said. "Which is both of you?" "Yes." She met his eyes. "I have not yet shared it with him." Harry looked at her steadily. "Why not?" "Because I'm trying to decide," she said, and it was the most honest thing he'd heard from an adult at Hogwarts so far, not a performance of honesty, not managed transparency, just a person telling another person a true thing, whether my obligation is to the headmaster or to the student sitting in front of me. Harry thought about that. He thought about McGonagall, what he knew, what he'd inferred. She was a rule follower in the deepest sense, not because rules were convenient but because she believed that the system worked, that the right order of things mattered, that structures held because people held them. And here was a structure cracking at the foundations, and she was standing at the crack trying to figure out which side she was supposed to be on. "It doesn't have to be a conflict," Harry said. "Not yet." "It already is," she said quietly. "Then tell him when you decide to." He picked up his bag. "I'm not asking you to protect me from him. I can do that myself." He paused at the door. "But I appreciate that you're thinking about it." She looked at him for a long moment after he said that, long enough that he could see her working through something, the careful internal machinery of a person revising a conclusion they'd held for a while. "You're not what I expected," she said finally. "People keep being surprised by that," Harry said. "I don't entirely understand why. Nobody asked me what I was going to be." He went to dinner. The evening brought Quidditch. Harry had known it was coming, the scheduled flying lesson was Friday, and the Slytherin-Gryffindor combination meant the entirety of both houses would be watching, and he'd spent a week listening to various people's assumptions about his flying ability. The Gryffindors assumed he'd be exceptional because the legend required it. The Slytherins assumed he'd be competent but nothing more, because legends rarely survived contact with practical tests. Draco seemed to be watching for something specific that Harry hadn't worked out yet. Madame Hooch stood at the front of the field with the brisk authority of someone who spent most of their time outdoors and found all indoor activities slightly insufficient. She walked them through the procedure, right hand extended, up, and Harry's broom was in his hand before the word had finished, which Madame Hooch saw and marked without commenting. They mounted. They kicked off. And Harry, who had never been on a broomstick in his life, discovered that flying was the one thing he had never been afraid of, not even when he didn't know it existed. There was no adjustment period, no uncertainty, just the clean immediate certainty of it, the wind and the height and the broom responding to his balance and intention like an extension of himself. He went up. Not a careful first year up. A proper, full height up, 50 feet, the castle walls rising around him and the ground spreading out below and the lake flashing silver in the morning sun, and he felt, for the first time since arriving at Hogwarts, absolutely uncomplicated. Below him, he heard the intake of breath from the gathered students. He came back down. He landed clean. Madame Hooch was looking at him with an expression she was working hard to keep professional. "Mr. Potter," she said. "Have you flown before?" "No," he said. She looked at him for another moment, then looked at her clipboard, then looked back up at the sky as if consulting it. "Right," she said, and moved on to the next student, and Harry stood with his broom and looked at the castle and thought about patience and timing. What happened next was Draco. Neville had gotten into trouble, gone up too fast, too panicked, the broom responding to his fear rather than his intention, and he'd been flung off at about 30 feet and come down hard on the grass. He was unhurt but shaken, and in the scramble Madame Hooch had taken him to the hospital wing and left the class strictly on the ground. Draco had found Neville's remembrall in the grass and stood holding it with the careless entitlement of someone who knew nobody was going to challenge him, saying something to the Gryffindors that Harry could see was working on Ron Weasley's temper with the efficiency of a hand on a pump. Harry walked over. Not ran. Walked, at a normal pace, with his broom in his hand. "Malfoy," he said. "Give it back." Draco turned. He looked at Harry with an expression that was calculating and also, faintly, testing, the look of someone who wanted to know how this was going to go. "You want it, Potter? Go up and get it." He threw the remembrall hard and high. Harry was already moving. He was on the broom and in the air in one motion, 30 feet in a second, 50, 70, the remembrall spinning upward, beginning to arc back down, and he caught it at the apex of its arc without slowing, without fumbling, his hand closing around it at the exact moment gravity took it, and then he was coming back down in a long smooth curve and landing, again, clean. The Gryffindors made a significant amount of noise. The Slytherins were very quiet. Draco's expression had moved through approximately 4 things while Harry was in the air and landed on something Harry hadn't seen from him before, something that looked, unexpectedly, like satisfaction. Like he'd been waiting to see this and it had confirmed something he'd needed confirming. Harry walked over to Neville's friend, a round-faced Gryffindor whose name he didn't know yet, and handed her the remembrall. She stared at him, temporarily unable to speak. "He's fine," Harry said. "Neville. He fell the right way, you go limp, you take less damage." She nodded, somewhat in shock. He went back to the Slytherin side. Gemma Farley was at dinner when Harry sat down that evening, which she wasn't usually. She ate with the 6th years, at the other end of the table. She'd moved specifically. She sat down across from him and said, without preamble, "Marcus wants to put you on the Quidditch team." "I'm a first year," Harry said. "The rule, Marcus is the captain and he's prepared to argue exceptional circumstances with Professor Flint, with the teacher Flint, not him, his uncle, I know who you mean. And he has a precedent case from 1847 that he's been sitting on for 2 years waiting for someone to be worth breaking the rule for." She looked at him with the brisk, professional attention she brought to most things. "Are you interested?" Harry thought about it. Quidditch was politics in a different register, public, visible, the kind of performance that the castle watched. He was already visible enough. But a Slytherin team with genuine competitive ability changed the internal dynamics of the house in ways that might be useful, and the precedent-breaking aspect of it was the kind of signal that could be sent without having to say anything directly. Also, and he was honest with himself about this, he wanted to fly again. "Tell Marcus yes," Harry said. "But I want to negotiate the practice schedule." Gemma looked like she was suppressing a smile. "You're going to negotiate with Marcus Flint?" "He needs me more than I need Quidditch," Harry said. "So yes." She left. Theo Knott, who had overheard everything, said from behind his goblet of pumpkin juice, "You're going to be exhausting to know." "You're still here," Harry pointed out. Theo drank his pumpkin juice. The night it happened with Dumbledore, Harry had been half expecting it. He was in the library, after dinner, the quiet period when the library was occupied by serious students and people who had left their homework too late, working through an advance reading list he'd put together from 3 different sources, when the library door opened and Dumbledore walked in. Not looking for Harry, apparently. Walking with the easy, unhurried energy of someone who visited the library regularly and had no agenda beyond browsing. He moved along a shelf near the window, hands behind his back, stopping occasionally to tilt his head at a spine. Harry watched him. He did not close his books. He did not change his posture. He waited. Dumbledore drifted closer, not directly toward Harry, more like a tide coming in, natural and inevitable, and eventually settled into the chair across the table from Harry with the gentle sigh of a man who had been on his feet all day. "Good evening, Harry," he said. "Professor Dumbledore," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at the books on the table, the stack Harry had been working through. The top one was a text on Wisengamot constitutional law, which Harry had not bothered to hide. "Interesting reading for a first year," Dumbledore said, with the warm curiosity of someone making an observation about the weather. "I'm interested in understanding how things work," Harry said. "A fine quality." Dumbledore smiled, the full warm smile, the one that had all the history of the wizarding world behind it. "You've settled in well. Slytherin suits you, I think, in ways that may surprise you." "It suits me in ways I expected," Harry said. "I chose it." "Yes." Dumbledore looked at him with the familiar twinkling warmth that Harry was beginning to understand as a management technique, not insincere exactly, but deployed. "I must confess it surprised me. Though perhaps it shouldn't have. You have always been," a pause, a slight smile, "your own person." Harry said nothing. He'd learned that silence was considerably more powerful than argument in conversations where the other person expected argument. Dumbledore waited for a moment, found the silence continuing, and shifted slightly. "I wondered if we might speak candidly," he said. "About the Gringotts notification." "Of course," Harry said. "The lordship acknowledgements are quite significant. 5 ancient houses is unprecedented in the modern era. I want you to know," and his voice had moved into a different register now, something closer to the genuine, a man trying to communicate something real across a significant gap, "that anything I have done in my management of your affairs has been done with your best interests as my primary concern." Harry looked at him. He kept his voice completely even. "The guardianship instrument that you signed in November 1981, he said, "was not recognized by Gringotts under the Accord of Ragnarok I. Dumbledore was still. The twinkle dimmed very slightly, not gone, but adjusted. "Goblin law is older than the Ministry," Harry said. "You know that. The arrangement was not brought to Gringotts for review. I was not a recognized lord at the time, I understand that. But the disbursements from the trust vault to the Dursley family were made under an instrument that goblins would have refused to validate." He put his quill down. "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm describing what I found." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, the warmth was still there but something underneath it had become more direct, more present. "You found quite a lot," he said. "I read the contract," Harry said. "I think a lot of problems in the wizarding world come from people not reading the contracts." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, and Harry looked back, and for the first time he saw something in those eyes that wasn't warmth or calculation or the managed certainty of a man who was used to being right. He saw something closer to uncertainty. The look of a man who had built something very carefully over a very long time and was now sitting across from an 11-year-old who had walked into the building and looked at the foundation. "Harry," he said, and it was quieter. "There are things in motion, things that have been in motion for a decade, for longer, that concern your safety. Your protection. I want you to trust that the decisions I made were not made lightly." "I don't doubt that," Harry said. "I doubt that they were yours to make." Silence. "The Elder Wand," Harry said. Not aggressively. Just clearly. Gringotts has documented its ownership chain. It came to you from Grindelwald in 1945. He paused. The wand responds to the last person to defeat its master. I've read the history. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. I'm not asking for it back. I don't need it. But I want us both to understand that I know what I know. Dumbledore looked at Harry Potter, 11 years old, sitting in a library chair with 5 lordships acknowledged and signed, with goblin law behind him and ancient magic in his blood, and was, for possibly the first time in a very long time, entirely and genuinely uncertain. What do you want? Dumbledore said. It was a question rather than a challenge. A real question, from a man who was finding that his map didn't match his territory. My invisibility cloak, Harry said. It was removed from the Potter Vault on November 1st, 1981. Gringotts has filed a recovery notice. I'd like it returned. Dumbledore was quiet for another moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. I will have it sent to you. Tomorrow, Harry said. Another pause. Tomorrow, Dumbledore said. Harry opened his book again. Thank you, Professor, he said. Have a good evening. Dumbledore stood. He moved toward the door, and at the last moment he stopped, one hand on the door frame, and said, without turning, You remind me of someone. My father? Harry said. Your mother, Dumbledore said. And left. Harry sat alone in the library for a moment after that. The candles burned low and even and the bookshelves rose around him in their orderly dark walls, and he thought about a woman who had been told she was one thing when she was actually another, who had been extraordinary and hadn't known the full shape of what she was, and who had done something at the end that even the people who studied it most carefully didn't fully understand. He thought about the Peveril Ward. About sacrificium. About willing sacrifice and what it meant that the most powerful protection in recorded magical history had come from a woman who hadn't known she was a Ravenclaw heir, who had gone into it without the full picture and had done something magnificent anyway. He thought about the full picture. About having it. About what you could do with it that she hadn't been able to. He went back to his book. There was still an hour of library time left and he had 3 more chapters to get through before bed. The cloak was on his pillow the next morning. No note. No explanation. Just the cloak, folded into a neat square, exactly where he'd wake up and find it. Harry unfolded it and held it up, and the light went through it, and through the fabric he could see his own hands disappearing. Draco was watching from across the dormitory, openly for once. What is that? An invisibility cloak, Harry said. Family heirloom. Those are extraordinarily rare. Yes, Harry said, folding it again and placing it in his trunk. Draco stared at the trunk for a moment. He just gave it back. Dumbledore? He returned it, Harry said. It was mine to begin with. Draco was quiet. Harry could see the calculation happening, the update to the model, the revision of assumptions. Draco Malfoy was building a picture of Harry Potter, and every time he thought he'd finished it, Harry added something that required a new frame. My father, Draco said slowly, wants to meet you. I know, Harry said. Not yet. He won't like that. That's fine, Harry said pleasantly. I'll meet Lucius Malfoy when it's useful for me to meet Lucius Malfoy. Tell him he's welcome to wait. Theo not made the small laughing sound from behind his book. Draco stared at Harry for another moment, then turned back to his own trunk, and Harry thought he could see, in the precise set of Draco's shoulders, the careful internal adjustment of someone who had been raised to believe that a specific kind of power moved in a specific direction, and was beginning to notice that the current was different from the map. He picked up his bag and went to breakfast. It was a clear morning, the enchanted ceiling showing pale blue with early cloud, and the castle was filling up with the ordinary noise of a Friday, students animated with the approaching weekend, the particular energy of a place that contained young people being kept in one building together and regularly set difficult tasks. Harry ate eggs and toast and thought about what came next. The 30-day window was running. Somewhere in the ministry, an inheritance audit flag was sitting in a filing system, waiting for the formal notification date. Dumbledore knew about the lordships. Draco knew about multiple lordships without specific details. Lucius Malfoy knew about the audit. Theonot had passed on Harry's message to his father. McGonagall was still deciding. He had 24 days. In 24 days, the Ministry of Magic was going to find out that an 11-year-old first year at Hogwarts simultaneously held the lordships of 5 ancient houses, controlled 23 voting blocks in the Wisengamot when the math was done properly, and had already signed all the papers. He thought about what he needed before that happened. He needed to understand what was living in Hogwarts that Dumbledore was keeping in a vault on the 3rd-floor corridor. He'd noticed the corridor, the troll barrier, the security that was completely disproportionate to any ordinary school requirement. He'd noticed Dumbledore's careful non-explanations. He'd noticed the way Quirrell's turban had moved, once, in potions, and how Snape had watched it with an expression of intense, controlled dislike that Harry filed away and kept. He needed to understand his mother's heritage fully, not just the Gringotts documentation but the actual history, Helena Ravenclaw's line, what it meant magically that he carried it. He needed Neville on firmer ground. He didn't know why yet, but some instinct told him Neville mattered, not as an ally in any strategic sense but as something more like a compass. Neville was honest in the specific way of someone who hasn't had to learn performance yet. And he needed, at some point, to have a real conversation with Ron Weasley, who was well-meaning and fundamentally decent and operating under about 12 layers of second-hand information and family mythology that were stopping him from thinking clearly. He looked up from his eggs and found Hermione Granger looking at him from the Gryffindor table with her particular expression of ongoing calculation. He raised an eyebrow. She produced a folded piece of parchment from her robes and held it up briefly, a question. He nodded. She stood up and walked around to the Slytherin table with the determined air of someone who had decided that the social convention of separate house tables was a matter of logistics rather than law, and sat down across from him. A few Slytherins looked at her. She looked back. Nobody said anything. "I've been reading," she said. "I assumed," he said. "The Accord of Ragnarok I. The Ancient House Inheritance Protocols." She unfolded the parchment, her own notes, dense and organized and cross-referenced in the margins. The proxy seat situation in the Wisengamot. And the Ravenclaw succession records, which are publicly available in Hogwarts, a history 4th edition if you check the appendices that most people don't read. She looked at him steadily. "Your mother wasn't Muggle-born." Harry was quiet for a moment. Not surprised that she'd found it. Surprised at the speed. "No," he said. "She wasn't." Hermione held his gaze. "Does it matter to you? That I know?" He thought about it genuinely rather than strategically. "No," he said. "You'd have gotten there regardless. Better you get there with me than at it sideways." He paused. "Does it change anything? For you?" She considered. "It makes the pattern more complete," she said. "Someone buried that. Someone wanted Lily Evans to be Muggle-born." She tapped her notes. "The same someone who signed a guardianship instrument without proper authorization, who has been holding 5 proxy Wisengamot seats, who is currently, Hermione," Harry said. She stopped. "Not here," he said. Mild, not a command. "Not at breakfast." She glanced around, the hall, the staff table, the ordinary morning noise. Dumbledore was not present. Snape was looking at his coffee. But information had a way of traveling. "After dinner," she said. "Library." "Library," he agreed. She stood up and walked back to the Gryffindor table. A first-year boy Harry didn't know well had been watching with his mouth slightly open. Hermione sat back down and picked up her pumpkin juice with the air of someone who had done nothing unusual. Harry finished his eggs. The day continued. Charms with Professor Flitwick, who squeaked with delight when Harry performed Wingardium Leviosa correctly on the first attempt and then, being Flitwick, moved on to show Harry 3 progressively more complex applications of the same principle rather than making a fuss. Herbology in the greenhouses, earth under his fingernails and the particular sharp clean smell of a working garden. And flying practice, the first formal Slytherin team practice, because Marcus Flint had filed the exceptional circumstances paperwork and it had been approved by Professor Flint, who had looked at it for a long time before signing it with the expression of a man who suspected he was going to regret this and couldn't find the specific clause that would let him say no. Harry flew until the light went orange and the castle threw long shadows across the pitch. He flew until Flint told him, with the grudging respect of a Quidditch fanatic confronting genuine talent, that they were done and he could go. He landed. He looked at the castle against the evening sky, 5 centuries of stone and magic, and felt the 5 signatures settled in him now like geological strata, deep and permanent and completely his own. He walked back inside. He had 24 days, and he was done waiting to be who he was. Chapter 4, The Slytherin Problem. The Ministry notification arrived on a Monday. Not to Harry, he'd known the timing, had been tracking the 30-day window with the focused attention of someone watching a pot they knew was going to boil. It arrived to the Ministry of Magic's Department of Magical Law Enforcement, to the Wisengamot Administrative Services Office, and to 12 other departments whose names Harry had found in a governance manual he'd borrowed from the library's administrative law section. It arrived simultaneously to all of them, because Griphook had recommended the simultaneous delivery and Harry had agreed, since staggered arrival would allow interested parties to control the narrative before the full picture landed. He was in charms when it happened. He knew it was happening because Griphook had told him the exact date and time the notifications would be dispatched, and he'd noted the date in his journal in the same place he'd written down what to expect afterward. He cast Wingardium Leviosa on a cushion with one hand and tracked the time with the other and thought, right now, somewhere in London, a very large number of people are reading something that is going to significantly upset their understanding of the world. He set the cushion down gently and picked up the next one. Flitwick noticed his distraction. Flitwick noticed everything, which was part of what made him excellent at his job, but said nothing. Just watched Harry for a moment with the particular sharp-eyed attention of a former dueling champion who was still calibrating his assessment of what, exactly, he had in his first-year class. The reaction came in stages. The first stage was owls. 7 of them at dinner that evening, all at once, dropping letters onto the Slytherin table with the impressive disorganization of a coordinated panic. Harry sorted them into 3 categories by sender type: ministry officials, journalists, and family patriarchs of ancient houses, and put them all in his bag to read later. He ate his dinner. He ignored the considerable staring from other tables. He had a conversation with Theo not about the Transfiguration essay that was due Thursday. Draco watched him open each letter, note the sender, and set it aside without reading it, and the calculation on his face had moved into something new, something that was closer to genuine respect than anything else Harry had seen from him. "You knew when it was coming," Draco said. "I set the date," Harry said. "You're not worried." "I'm prepared," Harry said, which wasn't the same thing. Being prepared and being worried are different activities. Worried is something you do when you didn't see it coming. "I saw it coming." Draco was quiet for a moment. "My father sent one of those," he said, nodding toward the stack. "I know his handwriting," Harry said. "I'll read it tonight." Draco opened his mouth, paused, and then said something Harry hadn't expected. "He's not, look. My father is not going to react to this well. The Slytherin seat, specifically." He was careful with his words in the way of someone who had grown up in a household where the wrong choice of word had consequences. If you hold the Slytherin lordship, his position on the Wisengamot changes. His influence in certain circles changes. He spent 15 years building a very specific kind of network and you have just restructured the board, Harry said. "Yes." Harry looked at him. "Is that a warning?" Draco met his eyes with something that had real complexity in it, the expression of a boy who was loyal to his father and also genuinely, independently intelligent, and who was finding, not for the first time, that those two things were pointing in different directions. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. Harry appreciated the honesty. "Thank you," he said. "For telling me." Draco looked faintly surprised to be thanked, which told Harry something about the kind of household he'd grown up in. He looked away and went back to his dinner. The second stage arrived the following morning in the form of a ministry official. She was from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, small, precise, with very sharp eyes behind narrow glasses and the contained energy of someone who had spent decades navigating bureaucratic processes and had learned to move efficiently through obstacles without appearing to. Her name was Madame Umbridge, she explained to McGonagall in the entrance hall, and she was here regarding some quite important administrative matters concerning a student. Harry was in the corridor above and could hear the conversation perfectly. He'd been in the corridor above because he'd been walking past on his way to Transfiguration, and he'd stopped when he'd heard the voices, and listened, which was a thing he did with zero guilt. McGonagall's voice had the quality of a castle gate being closed. Any concerns regarding students at Hogwarts should be directed through the standard channels. I would ask you to arrange an appointment through the headmaster's office. This matter is of some urgency, the standard channels, McGonagall repeated, with a warmth that was several degrees below freezing, remain the standard channels regardless of urgency. Good morning. Harry made a note, Dolores Umbridge, DMLE, sent the morning after notification. Fast. Ministry was not going to wait and have a quiet think about this. They were going to try to move quickly and put something in place before Harry had time to establish his position. He had already established his position. He went to Transfiguration. The letter from Lucius Malfoy was precisely written on expensive parchment in a hand that was elegant in the way of someone who had been taught penmanship as a social skill rather than a practical one. It was polite, in the manner of polished politeness that is actually a form of pressure. It expressed Lucius's awareness of Harry's recent Gringotts activity and his earnest hope that Harry might consider a meeting at Malfoy Manor during the upcoming term break, to discuss matters of mutual interest in a comfortable and private setting. Mutual interest. Private setting. Translation: I need to know what you know and what you intend to do before you do it, and I would prefer to have that conversation in my house where I control the environment. Harry wrote back. He was polite in return, because politeness was always more efficient than hostility, and he told Lucius that he would be happy to meet, but that the meeting would take place at Hogwarts, in a setting of Harry's choosing, during the December visit weekend, and that Harry looked forward to an honest discussion. He sent it with the school owls before breakfast. Draco found him afterward in the common room and said, with the expression of someone who had just heard a gunshot, "You told my father you'd decide where the meeting was." "Yes," Harry said. "He's going to reply," Harry said. "He's going to reply and agree to it because refusing means I have something he doesn't and he knows it. He needs to understand what I know. That need is stronger than his pride right now." He looked at Draco. "I'm not trying to embarrass your father." "You're establishing dominance," Draco said, with the flat factual tone of someone who had been educated in exactly these dynamics and was watching them play out in a direction he hadn't anticipated. "I'm establishing that I'm not going to be managed," Harry said. "There's a difference. I don't want to run Lucius Malfoy's life. I just want him to understand that he doesn't run mine." Draco stared at him for a long moment. "You're 11, Draco said. "Everybody keeps saying that," Harry said. The duel started because of Blaise Zabini, which Harry hadn't anticipated, and for the first week of October he put it in the category of things he was watching but not directing. Blaise had said something in the common room, quiet, apparently casual, in the way that Slytherin conversations were always apparently casual while being precisely the opposite, about the Slytherin lordship. About what it meant for the house that their own founder's line had come forward in the body of a boy who'd grown up in the Muggle world and didn't know the first thing about Slytherin traditions. He'd said it while looking at the fire rather than at Harry. He'd said it in a tone that was not quite a challenge and not quite an insult, which was the specific tone that functioned as both simultaneously. Harry had let it sit for 3 days. He let it sit because immediate reactions were for people who hadn't thought about what they wanted the outcome to be. In 3 days he watched Blaise, how he moved, who he talked to, what he was good at. Blaise was good at potions, at social architecture, and at appearing uninvested in things he was actually deeply invested in. He was testing Harry because he wanted to know if Harry was worth following, and the test was whether Harry would recognize it. On the 4th day, during the free period after herbology, Harry went to the common room and said to Blaise, conversationally, "I think you should say it directly." Blaise looked up from his book. The common room had about 10 students in it and they all went quiet in the same moment. "Say what directly?" Blaise said. "Whatever the actual question is," Harry said. "Not the version wrapped in commentary about Muggle upbringings. The real one." A pause. Something shifted in Blaise's expression, the mask becoming more honest, which was the thing that sometimes happened when someone called a bluff and the person holding the cards decided to put them on the table. "Are you a Slytherin or are you wearing it?" Blaise said. "What's the difference?" Harry said. "A Slytherin survives by understanding where power is and positioning accordingly. Not by following rules or traditions or being good." Blaise's voice was even. "A Slytherin in Slytherin's own seat either knows that and acts on it, or he's a political symbol and he's going to get eaten eventually." He paused. "Which one are you?" "A Slytherin," Harry said. "Positioned where I chose to be, for reasons I decided on, aware of exactly what it means and what's coming because of it." He met Blaise's eyes steadily. "And the reason I haven't addressed any of this before now is that I was watching to see how things sat before I moved anything." Silence. The fire crackled. "That's a Slytherin answer," Blaise said. "It's a true answer," Harry said. "I don't need it to be a Slytherin answer." Blaise looked at him for another long moment. Then something in his posture changed, a fractional settling, a weight that had been held at tension releasing slightly. "Right," he said. "Good." He went back to his book. Harry sat down in the chair across from him and pulled out his potions notes. Theodore Knott, from the corner, said without looking up, "I told him you'd be fine." "Thanks, Theo," Harry said. "Don't make it a thing," Theo said. The actual duel was someone else's doing entirely. It was a 6th year. Cassius Warrington, broad and confident, who had been watching Harry with an increasingly sour expression since the Quidditch team announcement and who had apparently decided that the most efficient way to establish the correct social order in Slytherin was to challenge the first year who was drawing everyone's attention. He stopped Harry in the corridor on the way back from the Quidditch pitch after an evening practice. 2 of his friends were with him. Harry was alone, which was fine. Harry was usually alone moving between places, because walking with groups implied a kind of alliance you had to maintain, and he hadn't decided yet exactly what alliances he wanted to be maintaining. "Potter," Warrington said. "You're taking up a lot of space for someone who's been here 5 weeks." Harry looked at him with the same level assessment he brought to everything. Warrington was large, confident, had the specific ease of someone who had spent years being the most physically imposing person in any room and had come to rely on it. His friends were watching Harry for signs of the thing Warrington's physicality was supposed to produce. Harry thought, they want submission or anger. Either would do for their purposes. 5 weeks, 7 weeks, 5 years, Harry said. The space I take up doesn't really change based on how long I've been here. Warrington's eyes narrowed. You need to understand how Slytherin works. I think I have a reasonable grasp, Harry said. The older students set the tone, Warrington said. The younger ones learn it. That's how it's worked for 300 years and it's not changing because you've got a fancy inheritance. Harry looked at him for a moment. Are you challenging me to a duel? The directness of it seemed to briefly confuse Warrington, who had been expecting more build-up. Yeah, he said. I am. Midnight? Trophy room? Warrington blinked. Yes. Fine. Wand holster only, Harry said. No backup items, no friends at your shoulder. Just the duel. He paused. I want it to be fair. Warrington looked at him with the slight uncertainty of someone who had been geared up for an argument and found agreement instead. Right, he said. Harry nodded and walked back to the pitch for the broom he'd left near the changing rooms, and thought, midnight. He spent the time between dinner and midnight doing homework and reading 2 chapters of his Charms textbook and talking to Theo about the theory of nonverbal spellcasting, which Theo had been studying out of personal interest since 3rd year of what Harry assumed was an invisible school of his own devising. Can first years do it? Harry said. I can't, Theo said. Not reliably. It requires a level of focus that, he stopped. Why? Curious, Harry said. Theo gave him a look that suggested he suspected it wasn't just curiosity. The principle is that the wand focuses intent. If the intent is clear enough and the magic is strong enough, the verbal component is redundant. It's just a training scaffold. He went back to his book. Most 6th and 7th years can manage it. Not usually 1st years. Harry thought about the 5 signatures settled in him. About the oldest magic in Britain running through the Peveril line. About the fact that the night his parents died, something in him had survived a killing curse that had never failed before and had never failed since. He thought about whether most 1st years was a category that applied to him. He slipped out of the dormitory at 10 minutes to midnight with his wand and his invisibility cloak, which he'd worn exactly twice since Dumbledore had returned it, once to explore the 3rd-floor corridor and once to sit in the restricted section for an hour without checking out anything he wasn't supposed to, and moved through the castle with the ease of someone who had been memorizing its layout since September. The trophy room was high-ceilinged and moonlit, glass cases throwing silver rectangles across the stone floor, old Quidditch trophies and special services awards and House Cup records arranged in their careful institutional order. Harry stood near the window and waited. Warrington arrived 3 minutes late, which was either nerves or calculation, and he came alone, which Harry counted in his favor. His 2 friends not being here suggested that whatever else he was, Warrington had enough personal pride to want this done properly. They faced each other. Standard rules? Warrington said. 3 count, bow, first to disarm or incapacitate. Fine, Harry said. They bowed. Harry watched Warrington's wand hand, the small tension before a cast, the way the grip changed, and counted. 1. 2. 3. Warrington cast Expelliarmus with the confidence of someone who had used it in a dozen practice duels and knew the timing of it, the arc, the way it needed to land to work. It was a competent, well-executed spell. Harry stepped to the left, not a dive, just a single unhurried step, and the spell missed by 6 inches and hit a trophy case, which rattled impressively. In the same motion, Harry raised his wand. He thought very clearly about what he wanted. He felt the intent crystallize, no words, no voice, just the clear specific shape of Expelliarmus in his mind and the Peveril magic in his blood that was, he was beginning to understand, not something separate from him but something he ran on, like the current under a river's surface. Warrington's wand flew out of his hand and slapped against the far wall. The room was very quiet. Warrington stood with his empty hand still raised, staring at Harry with an expression that had moved through surprise and landed on something more complicated, not humiliation, because Harry had been careful to win the duel without theatrics, without commentary, without making it into a performance of dominance. Just a clean, efficient ending. Harry picked up Warrington's wand from the floor and walked over and held it out. Warrington took it. He was quiet for a moment, looking at it and then at Harry. "Nonverbal," he said. "You cast nonverbal." "Yes. You're a 1st year. Everyone keeps being surprised by basic facts," Harry said. "I'm not sure what to do about that." Something moved across Warrington's face, the specific internal movement of someone adjusting a significant assumption. He was not, Harry had established over the last 4 weeks, a stupid person. Aggressive and status-conscious and operating from a framework that the last 5 weeks had not prepared him for, but not stupid. Right, Warrington said finally. I understand. I don't want your position, Harry said. I don't want to run Slytherin's social structure. I just want to do what I'm going to do without someone standing in the corridor suggesting I don't have the right to be here. He paused. Does that seem reasonable? Warrington looked at him for a long time. Yeah, he said. It does. They walked out of the trophy room and back toward the dungeons without speaking, and it wasn't unfriendly. It was the silence of two people who had resolved something and were allowing it to settle. Snape found out about the duel, naturally. Harry didn't know how, possibly Snape had been watching the corridor, possibly someone had told him, possibly the man simply had some extrasensory awareness of student transgressions that was not documented in any magical text. He appeared in the common room the following morning before breakfast with the expression of someone who had been given information that had complicated his day. He looked at both Harry and Warrington. He did not ask questions. He said, "My office. After dinner." And left. Snape's office was colder than the rest of the dungeons, not physically, but atmospherically. Every surface was occupied by a potion or an ingredient or a jar of something Harry didn't want to look at too closely, and Snape's desk was one of the few spaces in Harry's experience where the desk itself seemed to project an opinion. Snape sat. Harry and Warrington stood. Snape looked at each of them in turn with the comprehensive, unflinching attention he brought to everything, and then he said to Warrington, "You challenged a student 4 years your junior." Warrington said nothing, which was probably the correct response. "You may go," Snape said. Warrington left quickly. Snape looked at Harry. The silence extended, the particular Snape's silence that was full rather than empty, doing a kind of work. Harry stood in it without rushing it and looked back at Snape with the open expression he'd decided on after the Transfiguration corridor. "A nonverbal cast," Snape said. "Yes, sir." "From a first year?" "Yes, sir." Snape was quiet. He looked at Harry with the expression Harry was beginning to understand as the one he had when he was encountering something that required him to update his model, and disliked updating his model, but was too precise a thinker to maintain an incorrect one for the sake of comfort. "You have been practicing." "I read the theory," Harry said. Theo not explained the application. "And I?" He paused, because this was the part that was genuinely difficult to explain without sounding extraordinary in a way that might attract the wrong kind of attention. "I find the verbal component optional." "Optional," Snape said. "I know what I want the spell to do. The word is just a label for the intent. If the intent is clear, the theory," Snape said, "is straightforward. The execution is not. The magical control required to perform non-verbal spellcasting is what separates." He stopped. He looked at Harry with the complex expression that lived behind the professional mask. "Your mother," he said carefully, "was the same way. The mechanics were transparent to her. She understood what the magic was doing rather than following the procedure for making it do something." He paused. "It is an exceptional quality." Harry held his gaze. "You knew her well." "I knew her," Snape said. His voice was very precise. "We grew up in the same town. She was another pause, and Harry could see the word he wasn't saying, the history he was editing. "We were friends, before Hogwarts." "She was Muggle-born," Harry said. "That's what everyone told her." Snape went very still. Harry watched him. He'd been waiting for the right moment to say this to Snape, not as a weapon, not as a manipulation, but because Snape had known Lily Evans and because whatever truth Snape had been carrying about her was part of a picture Harry was still assembling. "She wasn't, though," Harry said. "I found out from Gringotts. She was Helena Ravenclaw's direct descendant." Her family's magical line was dormant for 3 generations. No one told her. Snape was looking at him with an expression that was, for once, completely unmanaged, all the careful professional containment stripped back by something Harry hadn't expected. Not shock exactly. Something older. Something closer to grief, and underneath the grief, something that looked dangerously like fury. No one told her, Snape said quietly, and his voice was different from his classroom voice, flatter, more personal. No, Harry said. Someone had the records. Gringotts had them. They were never hidden, just never requested. He paused. She spent her whole life thinking she was one thing. She went into that house in Godric's Hollow not knowing the full picture of what she was. Snape was quiet for a long time. He looked at his desk. The jars and ingredients and the accumulated precision of a life built from exact things seemed very present, very still. Who knew, Snape said, at the time she received her letter. I don't know for certain, Harry said. I know who had access and who had reason and who has consistently known more than they've chosen to share. He held Snape's gaze. I think you know too. Another silence. This one had a different texture, denser, more personal. What do you want from me? Snape said, and it wasn't hostile. It was genuinely uncertain. The question of a man who was trying to work out what position he was standing in. Nothing right now, Harry said. I wanted you to know. Because you cared about her and you've been operating on incomplete information and that's not, he paused, choosing the word, fair. Snape looked at him with the expression he reserved for things that surprised him completely. Fair, he said, with a faint, involuntary quality to the word. Yes, Harry said. She deserved to know what she was. She didn't get to. That matters. Snape was quiet for a long moment. You are not what I expected, he said. I know, Harry said. I'm going to keep not being it. He picked up his bag. Thank you for seeing me, sir. Potter, Snape said. Harry stopped. The duel. No points will be taken. Given that Warrington initiated and you resolved it cleanly. A pause. 10 points to Slytherin. For the non-verbal casting. Harry looked back. Thank you, sir. He went to dinner. The common room that evening had a different quality. The Warrington conversation had moved through the house in the way that Slytherin information always moved, quickly and without obvious channels, and Harry was aware of a shift in the room's atmosphere, something that had reoriented around him without anyone announcing it. Not deference. Not the celebrity attention of the Great Hall. Something more specific, the specific kind of respect a group of people who valued intelligence and positioning gave to someone who had demonstrated both. Blaise had shifted his chair to a position slightly closer to Harry's. Daphne Greengrass, who had been cool and elegant and entirely unreadable for 5 weeks, sat down beside him and said, without greeting, you should know that the Greengrass family has been waiting for the Slytherin seat to have a recognized lord for 40 years. Harry looked at her. Is that context or an opening position? A very slight smile. Both, she said. What does your family want? Stability, she said. Not chaos. Not the kind of political restructuring that comes from someone with a point to prove. We want the old houses recognized and the new power arrangement settled before it becomes unstable. That's also what I want, Harry said. I don't want chaos. I want, he thought about the right word, clarity. I want the actual shape of things to be visible instead of buried. Daphne looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded, a precise, considered nod, the kind that meant something. Then we might be able to work together. We might, Harry agreed. He liked Daphne. He suspected she liked him approximately as much as she liked anything, which was guardedly, with full awareness of the transactional elements, and with considerably more genuine engagement than she showed on the surface. Pansy Parkinson was more complicated. She'd been watching Harry with an expression that blended suspicion and curiosity in roughly equal measures since the first week, and on the Thursday of the fourth week of October she dropped into the chair across from him in the common room and said, "Why did you really pick Slytherin?" He told her the same thing he'd told Draco. She listened with her chin up and her eyes sharp and then said, "Most people pick the house they think will help them most." "Yes," Harry said. "You picked the one that would help you least, initially, and require the most work." "Which is exactly where I want to be," Harry said. "I don't want things to be easy at the start." "Easy at the start means someone else set it up for you." He looked at her. "Does that make sense to you?" Pansy was quiet for a moment. "Then, my mother arranged most of my life before I got here." "I know the feeling," Harry said dryly. She looked at him with a surprise that had something genuine in it, and then laughed, a real laugh, quick and unself-conscious, completely different from her usual careful social presentation. She seemed mildly embarrassed by it. Harry didn't comment, just went back to his book, and after a moment she pulled out her own charms homework and they sat in companionable silence for half an hour. The letter from Lucius Malfoy came back on a Friday. It was on the same expensive parchment as the first letter, the same elegant hand, and it was polite in exactly the same way the first one had been, the polished surface over the layer of controlled discomfort underneath. It agreed to the meeting at Hogwarts in December. It specified that Lucius would be accompanied by his solicitor, which was a statement about the seriousness with which he was taking this. Harry wrote back and said, "No solicitors. Just Lucius, and Harry, and if Lucius wished, Draco." A family conversation rather than a formal negotiation. He sent it and waited. The reply came back within an hour. Agreed. Draco came to find him in the library that evening. He agreed, Draco said. Yes. He never agrees to those terms. Draco sat down across the table with the look of someone recalibrating something significant. He always wants his solicitor. He wants witnesses. He wants control of the environment, Harry said. But he needs this meeting more than I do, and he knows it. Without a relationship with me, he's trying to navigate the new board blind. He looked at Draco. "You'll be there." "I told him you could come." Draco was quiet. "You included me. You're his son and you've been honest with me about what you know and what you don't," Harry said. "That matters. Also," he paused, considering how direct to be, "you're going to have your own relationship with the political landscape of the wizarding world eventually, separate from your father's. Starting to understand how it actually works rather than how your father's version of it works seems useful." Draco looked at him for a long moment. "You're trying to, nothing," Harry said. "I'm not trying to do anything to you. I'm trying to do things in general and you're in proximity." He picked up his quill. "Whether that's useful to you is your decision." Draco was quiet for a while. The library worked around them, quills scratching, pages turning, the distant creak of the castle settling its enormous weight. "The Slytherin seat," Draco said eventually. "My father's influence in the old families, it's mostly built on being the bridge between the Malfoy position and the old Slytherin traditions. If you're holding the Slytherin lordship, that bridge goes somewhere different." "I know. He's going to come to that meeting wanting to be the bridge for you instead. Your connection to the old families, your political interpreter." A pause. "He's good at it, actually. He knows the landscape better than almost anyone." Harry thought about this. "I'm not interested in replacing one person who manages my position with another," he said. "But I'm also not interested in fighting everyone who has a legitimate position in the magical world just because they had it before I got here." He met Draco's eyes. "Your father has knowledge I don't. He has relationships I don't. Those things could be genuinely useful if the terms are right." "And the terms," Draco said, "are that he understands you're not navigating his world. He's navigating yours." "Yes," Harry said simply. Draco absorbed this. Then something in him seemed to settle, not comfort, but resolution, the look of someone who has been watching two things they're loyal to on a collision course and has found, possibly, that the collision doesn't have to be the ending. He's still going to push, Draco said. I know, Harry said. I'll manage it. I know you will, Draco said, which was the most direct thing he'd ever said to Harry, and which he immediately covered by standing up and saying he had potions work to finish, and leaving quickly. Harry watched him go. Then he went back to his book. In the late evenings, after the dormitory settled and Crabbe was snoring and Theo was a motionless shape under his blankets, Harry sometimes lay awake listening to the lake. Slytherin's windows made the lake audible in a way the upper floors weren't, the pressure of it, the movement, occasional sounds from the creatures that lived there. He'd learned to identify the giant squid by the particular slow resonance of its movement, different from the smaller things that flickered past. On the Thursday before the ministry attempted its second visit, this time a more senior official, an undersecretary rather than a low-level DMLE representative, Harry lay awake thinking about Quirrell. He'd been thinking about Quirrell intermittently since the start of term in the way you thought about something that doesn't fully add up. Not obsessively. Just noting it, returning to it, letting the picture develop. The turban. The stammer, which came and went in a way that felt inconsistent rather than chronic. The way Quirrell stood when he didn't think he was observed, differently from how he stood in front of a class, the defensive self-presentation dropping away into something tighter, more contained, almost furtive. The way Snape watched him. Specifically the way Snape watched him, with the focused contained dislike of someone who was not simply having a professional disagreement but was watching something he considered actively dangerous. And the third-floor corridor. The vault that wasn't a school vault. The dog he'd heard through the door, 3 separate times now, 3 separate overlapping sets of breathing, and the magic that ran underneath the floor of that corridor like a river under ice, something vast and old being kept in place by considerable effort. He thought about the Philosopher's Stone, which Gringotts had moved in July, which Hagrid had retrieved from Vault 713 on the same day he'd taken Harry to get his school things. He thought about the timing. He thought about why someone would move the most powerful magical artifact in the world from the most secure bank in Britain to a school full of children. He thought about Quirrell's turban, and the way it moved sometimes when the classroom was still. He thought, Voldemort is in this building. Not as a revelation, as a conclusion. The end of a chain of observations that had been accumulating since September and had now reached the only destination that made them all consistent. He lay in the dark with the lake pressing its enormous cold weight against the windows and the Slytherin inheritance humming very quietly at the edges of his awareness, and he thought about what to do with that. He thought about the Peveril ward. About the protection that had been in him since he was 1 year old. He thought about what Griphook had said, a protection that belongs to you, that no one can redirect or exploit. He thought about 5 houses. 5 lordships. 5 sets of old magic pointing at a single person like a constellation finding its shape. He was 11 years old and there was a Dark Lord in his school. He thought, well, that's going to need addressing. He rolled over and went to sleep. He'd need to be well rested. Chapter 5, What Ravenclaw Knows. The restricted section of the library had a particular smell, old paper and dried ink and something underneath those things that was older still, the specific smell of knowledge that had been sealed away because someone decided it was dangerous. Harry had been in it 4 times by the middle of November, twice under the invisibility cloak and twice with a signed note from Snape that said for advanced potion research in Snape's compressed, precise hand. Snape had not asked what Harry actually needed the access for. He'd produced the note on a Tuesday morning after their post-duel conversation with the air of someone discharging a debt, and Harry had taken it without comment and used it without abusing it, which he suspected was exactly what Snape had been testing. What he found in the restricted section was not a single answer. It was a series of pieces that fit together only if you were looking for them, scattered across 3 different centuries of magical theory, buried in footnotes and appendices and the kind of dense academic prose that most people abandon 20 pages in. Harry read all of it. He read slowly and made notes and read again, and the picture that assembled itself over 3 weeks of careful work was both more specific and more disturbing than he'd expected. He found what he needed on a Wednesday evening in mid-November. The book was called On the Persistence of Soul Fragments in Enchanted Objects, published 1543, and it was in the restricted section not because it was particularly dangerous to read but because it was the kind of text that became dangerous only if you understood exactly what it was describing. The theory was dry enough and the language archaic enough that most students who found it would close it within 10 minutes. Harry read it in 45 and then sat with it closed on the desk in front of him and let himself process what it meant. A soul could be divided. Under extreme circumstances involving the willing commission of an act so fundamentally against the grain of living magic that it split the self apart, a fragment could be anchored in an object. Could survive the death of the body. Could persist, waiting, looking for a host. He thought about Quirrell's turban. He thought about the fact that Voldemort had tried to kill a 1-year-old child and had, by every account, failed so catastrophically that his own body had been destroyed. He thought about what it would take to destroy a body without destroying a soul. He thought about what it would take to survive in that fractured state for a decade, moving from host to host, waiting. He thought about the back of Quirrell's head. Then he thought about something else. Something the book mentioned in a subordinate clause, almost as an aside: the soul fragment, once anchored, generated a resonance. A magical frequency that could, in a sufficiently sensitive individual, be perceived directly. Harry had been feeling something at the back of his awareness for 11 years that he'd never had a name for. A pressure. Not painful exactly. More like the feeling of standing too close to something with a very strong magnetic field, a pulling toward that he'd learned to ignore. He sat in the restricted section at 10:30 in the evening and understood, with the cold clarity of a problem fully solved, that the pressure wasn't Quirrell. It wasn't the stone. It wasn't even Voldemort's presence in the castle. It was in him. He set the book down very carefully and looked at his hands. Voldemort had tried to kill him. The killing curse had rebounded. Something in Harry, the Peverell ward, his mother's willing sacrifice, the oldest magic in Britain running through his blood, had deflected it. But a curse that powerful, aimed at something that close, didn't leave nothing behind. A piece of it had lodged somewhere. A fragment of the person who had cast it. He thought about how that fit with the document Griphook had shown him. Sacrificium. The ward that belonged to him. The ward that no one could exploit without his knowledge. He thought about what knowledge meant. Whether naming it counted. He thought, I have a piece of Voldemort's soul in my head and I have apparently been carrying it for 10 years and it has not killed me. Then he thought, with the specific calmness of someone who has decided that the first priority is information rather than reaction, Griphook needs to know about this. And there might be a way to remove it. He replaced the book exactly where he'd found it. He walked back through the library, through the dark corridors, down to the dungeons, and lay on his bed looking at the stone ceiling while the lake moved against the windows and the Slytherin inheritance hummed underneath everything like a bass note too low to hear properly. He spent 4 days sitting with it before he talked to anyone. He thought it through from every angle. The soul fragment, if that's what it was, and he was operating on theory and inference rather than confirmed fact, was currently dormant. It was not controlling him. It was not speaking to him. It was sitting in him the way a splinter sits in a finger, present, occasionally perceptible, not actively harmful at the moment but inherently wrong and eventually requiring attention. Voldemort presumably knew it was there. Or would know, if he was ever reconstituted enough to perceive it. Which meant the fragment was also, in some sense, a window, something that could be looked through in both directions if the conditions were right. This explained several things. It explained why Harry could feel Quirrell when he was near, the two fragments resonating. It explained the pain in his scar, which had been present since September as a low background ache and which flared occasionally in proximity to Quirrell in the corridors. It explained, darkly, why Dumbledore might have chosen to place Harry with the Dursleys behind blood wards rather than somewhere more comfortable. if he knew about the fragment, or suspected something similar, he might have believed that keeping Harry isolated and suppressed was somehow suppressing the connection. He thought about Dumbledore knowing this and choosing to say nothing, and felt something that wasn't quite anger, something colder and more focused than anger. He went to find Hermione on Sunday. She was in the library, which was where Hermione spent most of Sunday, at the table she'd claimed near the window with an arrangement of books that had expanded over the term into something approaching a personal installation. She looked up when he sat down and read his expression with the sharp accuracy she'd been developing over the past 2 months. "What did you find?" she said. He told her. He told her everything, the book, the soul fragment theory, the conclusions, the scar. He laid it out in order, factually, the way he would have presented it to Griphook, and watched her face move through the sequence of a very quick, very good mind processing information it hadn't anticipated. She was quiet for almost a full minute after he finished. This was, he had learned, Hermione's thinking silence, different from her surprised silence, which was shorter, and her disagreeing silence, which came with a particular set to her jaw. "The Peveril ward," she said finally. "The ward your mother activated. If it's what Griphook described, a protection that belongs to you specifically, that no one can redirect or exploit without your knowledge, then the fragment can't use the connection actively without you knowing." "That's what I think too," Harry said. "But knowing I think that and knowing it's true are different things. You need confirmation from someone who understands soul magic," she said. "Not Hogwarts faculty." She was already scanning the library mentally, cataloging sources. "There are 3 texts on soul theory in the restricted section that I know about from the library index. One of them, Anima Divisa, was published in 1601 and is considered the foundational work on the subject, but it was partially redacted by the Ministry in 1899. She looked at him. "The unredacted version is referenced in 2 footnotes in the restricted section copy. The footnotes cite a text held at the Department of Mysteries." "I can't get into the Department of Mysteries," Harry said. "No," she agreed. "But the Gringotts archive might have a copy. Goblin magical records predate the Ministry's censorship regime." She paused. "You could ask Griphook." He could. He would. But that was for later. Right now there was something else he needed to address, and Hermione was the right person to address it with. "My mother," he said. Hermione's expression changed, still focused, but softer. She'd had 2 months with the information about Lily's heritage, 2 months to sit with what it meant, and Harry could see that she'd been doing something with it beyond simple academic processing. "Tell me what you think," Harry said. She looked at him for a moment. "I think," she said carefully, "that someone made a decision in 1971 when Lily Evans got her Hogwarts letter. The Gringotts records were there. The lineage was documented. A witch who was clever and thorough, and we know at least one person at that time was both, could have found it." She paused. "I think that person decided Lily Potter née Evans was more useful as a Muggle-born." "Why?" "The war," Hermione said. "Voldemort's movement was built on blood status. Muggle-borns were targets, symbols, proof of his thesis that old magic was being diluted. A Muggle-born witch who was extraordinary, who was better at magic than most purebloods, was a counter-argument. She was evidence. She mattered to the resistance as a symbol." Harry was quiet. "And then," Hermione said, "she died. And she became a different symbol. The Muggle-born who gave her life to save her child from a dark wizard who targeted Muggle-borns." She held his gaze. "That symbol is very powerful. It anchors an entire story. The story that the magical world has been telling itself for 10 years. And if she was actually a Ravenclaw heir," Harry said. "Then the story is different," Hermione said. "Then she's not a Muggle-born who rose above her origins. She's an ancient house making a choice. She's part of a magical tradition that predates Voldemort's whole framework." She paused. "It's still powerful, but it belongs to a different narrative." One that doesn't require a boy who lived the way the first one does, Harry said. Hermione was quiet. Someone needed me to be the symbol, Harry said. The chosen one. The Muggle-born son. Born from sacrifice, protected by love, destined to face Voldemort. That story requires all of its parts to stay in their specific positions. He looked at the table. And someone has been working very hard to make sure the parts don't move. Harry, Hermione said. Do you think Dumbledore knew about your mother's lineage when she got her letter? He was Transfiguration teacher in 1971, Harry said. He became headmaster 3 years later. He had access to every student record at Hogwarts. He paused. I don't know. But I know the question isn't whether he could have found it. The question is whether he did. Hermione had her thinking face on. There's one more thing, she said. She reached into her bag and produced a piece of parchment covered in her own notes, small, cross-referenced, the margins dense with addenda. The Grey Lady. Helena Ravenclaw. She's still in the castle. Harry looked up. She's the Ravenclaw house ghost, Hermione said. She's been here since the founding. She's your ancestor, if the lineage is correct. She met his eyes. She might know things about the family line that aren't in any record. She's a primary source. Harry stared at her. Then he said, why didn't I think of that? You've been a bit busy, Hermione said dryly. He found Helena Ravenclaw on a Tuesday evening in the corridor outside the Ravenclaw Tower entrance, which was on the 5th floor in the West Wing, a long way from anywhere Harry habitually went. She was drifting along the wall with the particular quality of motion that distinguished ghosts from living things, not walking but persisting in a direction, the physical memory of movement without its mechanics. She was beautiful in the specific way of very old portraiture, all the detail of a person, the bone structure and the quality of intelligence in the eyes, captured in a medium that was slightly wrong, slightly outside the expected frequencies of living things. She stopped when she saw him. Not surprised, exactly. More like something that had been dormant becoming attentive. You have my look, she said. Her voice was the kind of quiet that carried perfectly. The eyes. The set of the brow. She drifted closer, studying him with the unhurried thoroughness of someone who had been waiting a long time and was not about to rush now that the moment had arrived. A boy. I had not expected a boy. My mother was Lily Evans, Harry said. Her grandmother's grandmother, I have the records from Gringotts. He paused. You know about the records? I know about the family, she said. I watched them go. One by one, generation by generation, the line moving further from magic, further from the castle, until they were so far I could no longer feel them. She paused. And then your mother came. I felt her the moment she crossed the threshold. She was, another pause, something moving through her expression that was old and complicated, remarkable. She had no idea. No, Harry said. Nobody told her. I could not tell her, Helena said. I am bound by certain limitations. I could not approach a student and tell her she was descended from me. It would have required her to come to me, to ask, and she never knew to ask. She looked at him. You knew. I read the records, he said. And Hermione Granger told me you were here. Helena smiled, a brief, complicated expression. A Gryffindor helping a Slytherin trace Ravenclaw lineage. My mother would have found that either gratifying or catastrophic, depending on her mood. Helena, Harry said. I need to ask you about the family's magic. Specifically about what comes down the maternal line from you. The Ravenclaw inheritance. He paused. And about something else. Her expression became more careful. Something else. The diadem, he said. The word landed in the corridor with a specific weight. Helena's expression shifted, not quite pain, but the ghost of it, the memory of pain that was old enough to have become simply part of her landscape. "You know about the diadem," she said. "I know it exists. I know it was lost. I know it's supposed to grant the wearer wisdom beyond ordinary measure." He met her eyes. "And I know someone brought it back to this castle." Helena was very still. "How do you know that?" "Because whoever brought it here needed a place to hide something, and this castle has a room that accommodates that, a room that responds to the need for hiding things, that fills with everything that's ever been hidden in it." He'd found the come-and-go room by following the magical resonance of the Ravenclaw inheritance downward through the castle, the Ravenclaw magic in him responding to the diadem the way a compass needle responded to north. "It's been there for decades. Since before I was born." He paused. "Who hid it?" Helena looked at him for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was very quiet. "A boy," she said. "Charming and brilliant and hollow at his center. He came to me and said all the right things, how important my mother's legacy was, how he wished to honor it. He was very good at saying the right things." A pause. Tom Riddle. The name settled in the corridor between them. Tom Riddle. Voldemort's name, before Voldemort. A student at Hogwarts. A student who had visited the Grey Lady, who had learned where the diadem was hidden, who had retrieved it and, Harry thought of the soul fragment theory, of the soul splitting, of something being put into objects. "He did something to it," Harry said. "I didn't know, then," Helena said. "I know now. I have had many years to know." Her voice was steady in the way of someone who has made their peace with a significant guilt. "He put a piece of himself into it. My mother's diadem is corrupted. It cannot be used as it was meant to be used." Harry processed this. A second fragment. Not in him, in the diadem, in the come-and-go room. He thought about the soul fragment theory, about the logic of a wizard who was trying to become immortal, and a cold and very clear thought moved through him. If Voldemort had been anchoring pieces of himself in objects, the piece in the diadem was not the first and not the last. "Thank you," he said to Helena. "For telling me." "You are my blood," she said simply. "And you are, not what I expected. Most people who come looking for the diadem want its power." She paused. "You want to understand what's wrong with it?" "Yes," Harry said. "I want to understand everything that's wrong with everything, and then deal with it." He paused. "I may need your help again." "You will find me here," she said. "I am always here." He went back to the dungeons and wrote 3 letters by wandlight at his desk while the dormitory slept around him. One to Griphook, requesting the Anima Divisa text and asking specifically about soul fragment removal theory. One to his own sealed records at Gringotts, instructing Griphook to add a note about the diadem's location for safekeeping. And a third that he sat looking at for a long time before writing. The third letter was to Dumbledore. He wrote, "Professor, I'd like to speak with you at your earliest convenience about certain matters that cannot wait for the end of term. I believe we have information relevant to each other's understanding of the current situation at Hogwarts. I suggest Thursday evening, your office, 7 o'clock. H. J. Potter." He sealed it and put it with the others and blew out his candle. In the morning, he sent the letters and went to breakfast and sat across from Theo and ate eggs and said nothing about any of it, because the dormitory was not the right space for any of that, and because the person he most needed to talk to about the soul fragment was Hermione, who already knew, and possibly Neville, who was going to need some preparation for what Harry suspected was coming. He found Neville after herbology, in the greenhouse corridor that smelled of earth and fertilizer and the particular living green sharpness of magical plants. Neville was cleaning his gloves with the focused attention he brought to anything involving plants. It was the only space, Harry had noticed over 2 months, where Neville's habitual bracing against difficulty entirely disappeared. "Can we walk?" Harry said. Neville looked at him, read his expression, and said, yes, without asking what this was about. That was the thing about Neville that Harry had come to appreciate deeply. He didn't preemptively complicate things. He waited to see what things actually were. They walked the grounds in the November chill, the lake flat and grey, the castle throwing its long morning shadow over the grass. Harry told him. Not everything, not the soul fragment, not yet, that was too much without more context. But the Voldemort situation. Quirrell. The stone. Neville listened without interrupting. His face went through several things but his feet stayed steady, which Harry thought said a great deal about him. "You're sure?" Neville said, when Harry finished. "I'm as sure as I can be from inference," Harry said. "I don't have confirmation. But the picture is consistent." Neville was quiet for a moment, looking at the lake. "What are you going to do?" "Talk to Dumbledore Thursday," Harry said. "Find out how much he knows and how much he's choosing not to act on and why. And if he knows everything and is just letting it happen, then I'll deal with it myself," Harry said, matter-of-factly. Neville looked at him sideways. "You'd go after Voldemort yourself?" "I'd remove a Horcrux from a room on the 7th floor and address the fragment issue through Gringotts and prevent a possessed defense teacher from stealing a priceless artifact," Harry said. "Whether that counts as going after Voldemort depends on your framework." Neville stared at him for a moment. Then he said, "I want to help." "Neville, I'm not asking to be the one who does things," Neville said, with a steadiness that surprised Harry. "I know what I can and can't do. I'm not good at spells under pressure and I know it. But I can be a second person who knows. Someone who can go for help if something goes wrong." He paused. "My parents fought him. I know that doesn't mean I have to, but," he stopped, and what came through his voice was something that had been sitting in him for a long time, something that had been handed to him at birth and that he'd been trying to figure out what to do with. "I want to not just be someone it happens to." Harry looked at him. The November wind off the lake pushed at both of them, cold and direct. "Okay," Harry said. "Okay?" Neville looked slightly surprised to have been accepted without argument. "You know the castle better than I do," Harry said. "You know plants, and some of what's up there on the 3rd floor is botanical. And you're right, having someone who knows and can go for help matters." He paused. "But Neville, you're not backup. You're involved. Which means you need to be informed, and I need you to be honest with me about what you can handle." "I can handle more than people think," Neville said. He said it quietly rather than defiantly, which made it land more solidly. "I know," Harry said. "That's why I'm telling you." They walked back toward the castle and Neville seemed lighter in some way that wasn't about posture. Something internal had settled, the same half-inch drop in the shoulders Harry had noticed on the boat in September, but this time much further and much more final. Thursday came. Dumbledore's office was exactly what Harry had expected from a man who had been accumulating for a very long time, circular, warm, dense with objects and paintings and the particular presence of a space that had been thinking about the world from its window for several centuries. The portraits of previous headmasters dozed in their frames or watched with varying levels of discretion. A large red bird Harry recognized as a phoenix regarded him from a perch in the corner with the calm of something that had been here long enough to have seen a great many things and had stopped finding them surprising. Dumbledore was behind his desk with 2 cups of tea already prepared. The Sword of Gryffindor was on the wall behind him. Harry noted this and said nothing about it yet. He sat down. He did not wait for Dumbledore to lead the conversation. "Tom Riddle," Harry said. "He's not just in Quirrell's classroom. He's in the castle in 3 different places, and one of them is inside me." Dumbledore's expression moved through several things in rapid succession, the first time Harry had seen him genuinely unable to manage his reaction in real time. He set down his tea. He looked at Harry with the specific expression of a man who had believed himself to be the one controlling the flow of information and had discovered the flow had been running in both directions. "Tell me," Dumbledore said quietly, "exactly what you know." "The soul fragments," Harry said. Horcruxes, I think they're called. The book doesn't use the word but the description is precise enough. He kept his voice even. He split his soul. Multiple times. Objects as anchors. The fragment in Quirrell is not an object, it's a passenger. There's a diadem on the 7th floor in the come-and-go room with a fragment in it. And there's one in me. He paused. In my scar. Dumbledore was very still. You knew, Harry said. Not an accusation. A fact. The silence stretched. The phoenix moved on its perch, a slow adjustment of feathers, filling the silence with a small warm sound. I suspected, Dumbledore said, and his voice had lost the warmth as management quality. He was speaking directly now, man to man, the way he'd spoken at the end of their library conversation and not before. I could not confirm it without, there is no test I could perform on a living child without significant risk. And the implications of confirming it were, I chose to wait. You chose to wait, Harry said. While I grew up in a house with muggles, carrying a piece of Voldemort's soul, with no information and no preparation and no one who was allowed to tell me the truth. Dumbledore looked at him. Yes, he said. I did. Harry let that sit in the room for a moment. He let Dumbledore feel the full weight of that yes, not because he wanted to punish him, but because the only thing that would ever move Dumbledore was reality, and the reality of what he'd done needed to exist in the room without Harry managing it for him. Gringotts, Harry said, is researching soul fragment extraction. The anima divisa in the unredacted version. There are references to a reversal process that works when the host is a living person rather than an object. He kept his voice factual. If it's possible, it needs to happen before Voldemort finds a way to reconstitute himself, because once he has a body the connection between us becomes a weapon. He paused. The fragment in Quirrell also needs to be addressed. He's going after the stone. I know, Dumbledore said. I have been monitoring. Monitoring isn't enough, Harry said. He's going to move before term ends. The artifact shouldn't be here. It was a mistake to bring it here. Dumbledore's expression did something Harry hadn't expected, something rueful, something that acknowledged the mistake rather than defending against it. Yes, he said. In retrospect. I believed the protection sufficient, and I believed, he paused, I believed your presence here would provide certain additional deterrence. You brought the stone to the school where I was, knowing it would attract Voldemort, because you thought having me here would help. Dumbledore said nothing, which was confirmation. You used me as bait, Harry said. I was 11 years old and you were using me as bait. I was protecting you, Dumbledore said, and there was a genuineness to it that Harry found almost harder to manage than dishonesty would have been. I believed the school to be the safest place for you. It's the same argument, Harry said. Every time. I was protecting you. The protections are sufficient. Trust me to manage the situation. He met Dumbledore's eyes. The problem isn't your intentions. The problem is that you keep making decisions that belong to me. Dumbledore looked at Harry Potter, 11 years old, 5 lordships, the oldest magic in Britain running through him, carrying a piece of Voldemort's soul in his scar and discussing it with the composure of someone managing a complicated but solvable problem, and said nothing for a long moment. What would you have me do? He said. Move the stone, Harry said. Tonight, if possible. Back to Gringotts. It's safer there than it has ever been here, and keeping it here is only creating an ongoing target. He paused. Quirrell needs to be removed from his position. I understand there are complications with simply dismissing a staff member who is being directly possessed, but the situation can't continue past the end of term. I had hoped, I know what you hoped, Harry said. You hoped Quirrell would lead you to Voldemort's method and you could address it at the source. But Voldemort doesn't have a source yet, he's a fragment in a turban and he needs the stone to become more than that, and if you take the stone away the threat diminishes immediately. He paused. The other fragments are a separate problem and a longer timeline. The stone is immediate. Dumbledore was quiet for a long time. You've been working through this, he said, since September. Since before that, Harry said. On the train I noticed Quirrell. In the first potions lesson I noticed Snape noticing Quirrell. He paused. The pieces were there. I just had to look. And the things you found at Gringotts were things I had the right to find, Harry said. The information about my mother. The lordships. The guardianship instrument. He held Dumbledore's gaze. I'm not angry at you for the decisions you made when I was 1 year old and you were trying to survive a catastrophic situation with no good options. I understand that. What I need from you now is the same thing I needed when I walked into this castle, honesty. Not managed information. Not the version of things you've decided I should know. The actual truth. Dumbledore looked at him. Can you do that? Harry said. The question settled in the circular room with its portraits and its phoenix and the Sword of Gryffindor catching the warm light above Dumbledore's head. The portraits had stopped pretending to doze. I will try, Dumbledore said, and it was not the answer Harry wanted but it was an honest one, which was better. I cannot promise to succeed. I have spent a very long time believing that the management of information was a form of protection. That habit does not dissolve easily. I know, Harry said. Work on it. He picked up his bag. The stone. Tonight? Dumbledore nodded slowly. Tonight. Thank you, Harry said. He stood to leave and then stopped because there was one more thing, and the one more thing was the thing he'd been leaving until last because it required a particular kind of steadiness to say. The proxy seats, Harry said. The 5 Wizengamot positions you've been holding. The ministry notification has been out for 3 weeks. I haven't moved to claim them formally yet because I wanted to understand the landscape first. He paused. I want to understand what you were doing with them. Dumbledore looked at him and this time he didn't manage his expression at all. What was there was tired. The weariness of someone carrying something very heavy for a very long time. Keeping them from people who would use them badly, he said. I was not wrong that the alternative holders would have been damaging. No, Harry said. You probably weren't wrong about that. He paused. But holding them yourself without a recognized lord's authority, while also being chief warlock, that's not protection. That's consolidation. Dumbledore was quiet. I'm going to claim them after Christmas, Harry said. I want to make sure the transition doesn't create a vacuum that gets filled by something worse. I'd like your help making a list of which families have legitimate competing claims and how to manage them. He paused. That's a genuine request. Your knowledge of the political landscape is better than anyone's. Dumbledore looked at him with the expression Harry was beginning to understand as the one Dumbledore had when he was revising something significant. You would work with me, he said, on this. I'd work with anyone who has useful knowledge and honest intentions, Harry said. Whether that's you or Griphook or Draco Malfoy's father or, he paused, Severus Snape, who I think is considerably more complicated and considerably more worth talking to than most people give him credit for. Dumbledore made a sound that Harry, improbably, recognized as a laugh. Not the managing kind. The real kind. Yes, Dumbledore said. He is. Harry left. He walked down the moving stairs from the headmaster's office with the stone walls flowing around him and the castle's enormous ancient presence pressing in from all sides, and thought about the difference between the conversation he'd planned in his head and the conversation that had actually happened. He'd expected defenses. He'd gotten weariness. He'd expected management. He'd gotten something closer to honesty than Dumbledore had probably intended to be. It wasn't enough. Not yet. There was still too much held back, too many decisions already made that couldn't be unmade, too many years of information control that had calcified into instinct. But it was a beginning, and beginnings were what you worked with. He came around a corner and stopped. Snape was in the corridor. Not waiting for him specifically, or if he was, he'd arranged himself well enough that it was deniable. He was walking in the opposite direction with his robes around him and his expression at its default setting. He stopped when he saw Harry. They looked at each other. "He's moving the stone," Harry said. Snape held his gaze. Something in his expression, contained, and then not quite. "Good," he said. The word was flat and precise and completely unambiguous. He started walking again. "Snape," Harry said. Snape paused. "Thank you," Harry said. "For watching Quirrell all term. For watching out for," he paused, finding the right version of this, "for making sure nothing happened before I could figure it out." Snape was very still for a moment. Then he said, without turning, "Your mother was the most talented student I ever taught." A pause. "Do not squander it." He walked away. Harry stood in the corridor for a moment, alone, and thought about a woman who had not known the full shape of what she was and had done something magnificent anyway, and about a man who had loved her and lost her and was still, against all the available evidence about his own character, against every professional persona he'd built over 30 years, trying to keep her son alive. He went to the dungeons. He found Hermione's letter waiting on his desk. She'd sent it via School Owl, 3 pages of dense notes on the Anima Divisa secondary sources she'd found, with a note at the bottom that said, "The extraction process is theoretically possible. I think you need to see what Griphook sends back before we plan the next step. Also, well done, whatever you did today. Something changed. The castle feels different." Harry read it twice. He wrote back, "Griphook's response should arrive by Monday. Stone is being moved tonight. One problem at a time." He sealed it and blew out the candle and lay in the dark while the lake moved against the windows and thought that there were still too many loose threads, still too much he didn't know, still a fragment of the darkest wizard in living memory sitting in his skull like a splinter, but the board had moved. He had moved it. And there was still time. Chapter 6, The Sword He Left Behind. Griphook's reply arrived Monday morning, sealed under the Accord stamp, and it was 43 pages long. Harry read it in the library during his free period with Hermione sitting across from him, and they read in silence with the focused parallel intensity of two people who had learned that the most efficient way to process information was to do it simultaneously and then compare conclusions. The Anima Divisa text was included in full, the unredacted version, as Harry had requested, the Ministry's 1899 redactions visible as gaps in the text that Gringotts had filled from their own archive copy. What the Ministry had removed was, predictably, the most operationally specific section, the chapter on extraction. The process was called expurgatio anime. It required 3 conditions. The fragment had to be genuinely passive, not actively controlling or communicating with the host. The host had to be a living person with sufficient magical depth to survive the process without the fragment's presence as an anchor. And the extraction had to be performed at a site of significant magical convergence, somewhere the ambient magic was deep and stable enough to contain what was released. Harry read the 3rd condition twice. "Hogwarts," Hermione said, looking up from her own copy at the same moment. "The castle itself," Harry said. "The founding magic." He thought about what he'd felt since September, the living weight of the castle, the accumulated centuries of it, the way it responded to him in ways he'd been filing away and not fully addressing. "It's the most magically saturated site in Britain. The extraction would need to be performed by someone with advanced knowledge of soul theory," Hermione said. "Which rules out almost everyone at Hogwarts." She paused. "Except possibly, Dumbledore," Harry said. "Or Snape," she said. "His knowledge of the dark arts is, well." She'd been revising her opinion of Snape over the course of the term in small, grudging increments, each one accompanied by the expression of someone who disliked updating a conclusion they'd been confident in. "Both of them," Harry said. "I want both of them involved." He looked at the page. "But not yet." Not until I understand the fragment in the diadem. Two fragments need to be handled in the right order. If Voldemort can perceive through the connection, he senses one extraction and panics the other, Hermione finished. Yes. The diadem first. Sever that anchor. Then you. The diadem first, Harry agreed. Which means going to the come-and-go room. Hermione looked at him with the expression she had when she was about to say something she'd already decided and was checking to see if he'd object. I'm coming. I know, Harry said. And Neville. Neville knows about the Horcrux theory, Harry said. And he knows about the third-floor situation. He's in. He paused. Not for the diadem specifically. I want him as our anchor to the outside. If something goes wrong. Hermione nodded. This was the version of inclusion that honored what Neville actually was rather than making him feel useful with a token role. She'd seen Harry do this enough times now that she recognized it as a considered approach rather than a fortunate instinct. When? She said. Friday, Harry said. Dumbledore moved the stone Thursday night, I confirmed with Snape this morning. Quirrell will know the stone is gone. He'll be destabilized. Off balance. Voldemort will be focused on that problem, not on me. He paused. The connection between me and the fragment is quieter when he's distracted. I felt the difference this morning. Hermione stared at him. You can feel when he's distracted. It's more like, the pressure drops, Harry said. The way a headache eases. He looked at the table. I've been feeling it all term. I just didn't have a name for it until 2 weeks ago. She was quiet for a moment. Harry. The fragment in you. She said it carefully. The extraction process, the third condition, the magical convergence site. The process will work, it's theoretically sound. But the text is explicit that it's painful. Significantly painful. Yes, he said. I read that section. You're not, she stopped. I'm not worried about it, he said. It's necessary. Whether it hurts or not doesn't change whether it's necessary. He paused. I'm more concerned about making sure I survive it, which requires the conditions to be exactly right, which is why I want both Dumbledore and Snape there. Belt and suspenders. Hermione looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, in a different tone, less clinical, more personal, you've been carrying it for 10 years. Yes. Doesn't that, she stopped again. Make me angry? He thought about it honestly. Not really. It's been there as long as I've been anything. Getting angry about it would be like getting angry about the rain. He paused. What makes me angry is that I wasn't told. The carrying I can handle. Being managed, being kept in the dark so that someone else could make decisions about my life, that's the part one don't accept. He looked at her. But I'm dealing with that. Hermione looked at him with the expression she had when she was feeling something she hadn't worked out the name for yet, and said nothing, and went back to the text. Harry found Dumbledore before dinner. The headmaster was in the corridor outside his office, coming from somewhere, going somewhere, the particular unhurried authority of a man who moved through his own school without needing to account for his movements. He stopped when Harry fell into step beside him. The diadem, Harry said. Come and go room, 7th floor. Friday evening. I'd like you and Snape to be available afterward. He kept his voice quiet and level, not a request exactly but not a command either, the tone of someone informing a colleague of a plan that required their participation. For the extraction. Dumbledore walked in silence for 3 steps. You've read the Anima Divisa. The unredacted version, Harry said. Gringotts. Another 3 steps. The process will be, I know, Harry said. That's why I want both of you there. Fail-safe. He paused. Will you? Yes, Dumbledore said immediately. Which was the right answer, and the fact that it was immediate told Harry that Dumbledore had been thinking about this for longer than this conversation, that the possibility of extraction had been somewhere in his considerations for years, filed away under when the conditions are right. And Snape, Harry said. I will speak with Severus, Dumbledore said. Tell him everything, Harry said. Not the managed version. If he's going to help, he needs the actual picture. Dumbledore looked at him sideways. You trust Severus Snape? I trust that he loved my mother and that she didn't know what she was, and that both of those things have been eating at him for 10 years, Harry said. That makes him motivated. And motivation in the direction of the right thing is enough for me to work with. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Then he said, and the warmth in it was real, the unmanaged kind, you are extraordinary, Harry. No, Harry said. I just paid attention. He paused. 7 o'clock Friday. I'll send word. He went to dinner. Neville was waiting for him outside the Great Hall, not dramatically, just standing near the door with his bag over one shoulder and his expression doing the particular thing it did when he'd made a decision and was waiting to find out if it was going to be accepted. I overheard, Neville said. In the corridor. Some of it. He paused. The diadem. Friday. Harry looked at him. You overheard in the corridor. I wasn't, I was just walking past and, Neville stopped. I want to come. Into the room. Not as the person outside who goes for help. I want to actually be there. Harry studied him. Neville Longbottom in November was a different quantity from Neville Longbottom in September. The 2 months had done something to him, not changed his fundamental nature, which was steady and kind and more perceptive than he gave himself credit for, but removed some of the accumulated fear residue, the constant bracing against the next failure. He was still not a powerful spellcaster under pressure. But he was someone who showed up, and showing up was more than half of everything. Yes, Harry said. Neville blinked. Just, yes? Yes, Harry said again. But Neville. If it goes wrong in there, and I'm not expecting it to, but if it does, you run. Not for help. You run and you get someone and you come back. That's not a secondary role. That might be the most important role. I know, Neville said. I understand. Good, Harry said. Friday. I'll tell you the time. They went into dinner. Neville sat at the Gryffindor table and Harry sat at the Slytherin table, and they were 40 feet apart, and the hall was loud and bright and full of the particular late November energy of students who could see the end of term from where they stood, and Harry ate his dinner and felt, with a strange clarity, the shape of what was coming. 5 weeks since the Gringotts meeting. 5 weeks since he'd signed his name 5 times and felt the architecture of himself rearrange. The term had been a sustained exercise in building, alliances, information, understanding, and Friday was the first moment where building became something else. Draco sat down beside him, which he did sometimes now, with less calculation and more simply because the dynamic had shifted into something that was not friendship exactly but was adjacent to it in ways neither of them had planned for. You're planning something, Draco said. Always, Harry said. Something specific. Something soon. He was watching Harry's face with the sharp assessment Harry had come to expect. You're calm in a particular way. I'm always calm, Harry said. You're calm in a way that means something is about to happen, Draco said, rather than calm in a way that means nothing is happening yet. There's a difference. He paused. My father is coming in 3 weeks. December 14th. I know, Harry said. He's going to push on the Slytherin seat, Draco said. He's had time to think about what the lordship means, and he's built a position, and he's going to come in with it arranged very precisely. I know, Harry said again. Draco looked at him. You don't seem concerned. I'm not, Harry said. Your father is intelligent and he knows the landscape and he has legitimate interests that I'm prepared to acknowledge. The meeting will go fine. He paused. As long as he accepts the conversation I'm willing to have rather than the one he's prepared for. Draco stared at him for a moment. Then, I'll try to prepare him. You don't have to, Harry said. Let him come in with his prepared position. Letting someone arrive with their full presentation intact before you redirect it is more respectful than preempting them. He paused. And it tells me more about what he actually wants. Draco absorbed this. You're going to learn more from letting him make his argument than from, yes, Harry said simply. Draco was quiet for a moment. Then, in a different tone, less calculated, more direct, the tone he used sometimes when he forgot to be performing Draco Malfoy and was simply being the 11-year-old he was, do you ever get tired of thinking about all of it all the time? Harry considered this genuinely. Sometimes, he said. But it's what I'm good at. And I don't know. It doesn't feel like effort the way that other things feel like effort. Flying, Draco said immediately. Flying doesn't feel like effort. Yes, Harry said. Flying. Draco smiled, the real one, not the practiced one, the quick genuine flash of it. Then we have one thing in common. Probably more than one, Harry said. We're just still finding them. Draco seemed to find this either deeply reassuring or mildly alarming. He ate his dinner and said nothing else, and Harry finished his and watched the hall and thought about Friday. Thursday passed slowly. Harry spent it reading, managing his correspondence, 3 more letters from old family patriarchs who wanted to discuss the lordships, 2 from ministry officials who were carefully not threatening him while clearly wanting to, and 1 from Arthur Weasley at the ministry that was warm and genuine and said, essentially, I don't know exactly what you're doing but I think it's important and if you need anything please ask. And doing his homework, because exams were in 3 weeks and Harry was not going to let any of this be an excuse for mediocrity in class. He went to bed at the usual time and slept badly for the first time in weeks, and in the space between sleep and waking he was aware of the fragment, the pressure at the back of his skull, the low persistent presence of something that was not him and had never been him, sitting in him like a stone in a stream, and he thought about tomorrow and felt no fear and some anticipation and a very clean, very focused readiness. In the morning he felt fine. Friday. He told Hermione 7 o'clock. He told Neville 7 o'clock. He sent a note to Dumbledore that said, afterward. Be ready. He got a note back that said, Severus and I will be in my office from 9. Come when you're ready. Signed, for the first time, simply, Albus. Harry held the note for a moment. Then he put it in his drawer. The day was overcast, December cold pressing at the castle windows, the grounds frosted and grey. Last day of classes before the weekend, potions in the morning, then a free afternoon. Harry sat in potions and brewed a strengthening solution with the focused precision that Snape had noticed the first week and now watched with the particular attention of someone who has stopped trying to catch a student failing and has started watching something else entirely. After the class, as students were packing up, Snape said, not loudly, not particularly aimed, just placed in the air, Potter. Your solution was slightly over-reduced. 2 more clockwise stirs before you remove the heat. Harry looked at the potion. Yes, sir. The effect is still within acceptable parameters, Snape said, still without looking at him. The difference would matter in a field application. I'll adjust, Harry said. See that you do. A pause. I will be in the headmaster's office this evening. His voice was completely neutral. If circumstances require it. They will, Harry said. Thank you. Snape moved to the next workstation. Harry packed his bag and left and felt, moving through the corridor toward the stairs and the day's remaining hours, something clicking into its final position. At 6:30 he met Hermione in the 7th floor corridor. She arrived exactly on time, she was always exactly on time, which Harry had come to find genuinely reassuring, with her bag and her wand and the particular expression she had when she was frightened and choosing to walk forward anyway, which he respected enormously. Neville was already there, standing by the tapestry of Barnabas the Barmy, with his wand out and his chin up and the steady look of someone who had decided. Harry looked at both of them. He said, "The room responds to what you need. Walk past the blank stretch of wall 3 times and think clearly about what you're looking for. In this case we need the room that hides things, it'll be full. Possibly overwhelming. We're looking for a diadem. It has a Ravenclaw design, an eagle in flight. When we find it, don't touch it. Wait for me." Hermione nodded. Neville nodded. Harry walked past the wall 3 times, thinking, "I need the place where things are hidden. I need to find what was put there." The door appeared. It was old and iron-banded and slightly warm to the touch. Harry pushed it open. The room of requirement, the room that hid things, was enormous. Bigger than it had any geometrical right to be, extending upward and outward in the dark beyond any reliable perception of boundary, filled with the accumulated hidden things of 1,000 years of Hogwarts students, towers of old furniture, boxes of contraband, broken instruments, discarded experiments, the archaeological strata of generations of people who had needed somewhere to put something they weren't supposed to have. It smelled of old things and dust and the particular quality of abandoned intention. Hermione sucked in a breath. Neville made a small sound. "Stay close," Harry said. He walked forward. He could feel it immediately, the Ravenclaw inheritance in him was responding, the compass needle quality he'd felt when he'd first realized the diadem was in the castle. He let it guide him through the towers of things, ducking under a broken wardrobe, stepping over a stack of moth-eaten portraits, moving deeper into the room with the clean directional certainty of something being drawn towards something else. The feeling was not warm. The diadem had the Ravenclaw magic in it, old and beautiful and exactly itself, and layered over it, inside it, something that was none of those things. Something cold and wrong and very alert. The fragment in the diadem was old and had been alone for a long time and was, Harry realized as he got closer, not dormant the way the fragment in him was dormant. It was aware. He stopped. He held up a hand and Hermione and Neville stopped behind him. "It knows we're here," Hermione said quietly. "Yes," Harry said. He looked at the tower of objects ahead of him and found it, on a broken bust of a man with a wig, the diadem placed there by a student decades ago with the casual negligence of someone who thought they were being clever. It was silver and elegant and had an inscription he could feel more than see, words that the Ravenclaw magic recognized as a motto older than the house's motto as Hogwarts used it. "Wit beyond measure is man's greatest treasure." And underneath that elegance, wrong and cold, the soul fragment. He could see it, not with his eyes exactly, more with the perception the Peverell inheritance gave him, the ability to feel old magic clearly. It was a darkness inside the silver. A stain. It had been there so long it had almost convinced itself it was part of the object. He walked up to it. The cold intensified. The fragment was doing something, not speaking, not a voice, but a pressure, the same kind of pressure he felt from his own fragment but outside him, directed at him, and it was not friendly. It was the compressed malice of something very old and very cornered. Harry stood in front of it and looked at it steadily and felt, very precisely, that he was not afraid. He thought about what Griphook had described. The Peverell ward. A protection that belonged to him, that no one could exploit without his knowledge. He thought about the ancient magic in him, Peverell, Gryffindor, Slytherin, Ravenclaw, Potter, and thought about what it meant that all 5 lines converged in a single person standing in front of a corrupted object in a hidden room. He thought about the moment with the hat. The sword it had offered. He'd refused it as a claim, refused being owned by it. But it was still his. It had always been his. He raised his wand. He didn't think about a spell. He didn't reach for a word or a label or a procedure. He thought about what the object was, not the Horcrux, not the fragment, but the diadem itself, his ancestors' work, something that deserved to be what it was meant to be rather than what it had been made into. He thought, out. The magic that came out of him was not like the spells he'd been casting in class. It was not Expelliarmus or Wingardium Leviosa or any named thing. It was all 5 inheritances moving at once, the deep settled weight of Peveril, the bright fierce heat of Gryffindor, the cold precise force of Slytherin, the lucid intelligence of Ravenclaw, the stubborn enduring bedrock of Potter, and it went into the diadem like a key into a lock. The fragment fought back. It wasn't a fight like the duel with Warrington, no physical component, no positioning, no technique. It was a contest of presence. The fragment throwing everything it had against the fact of Harry being here, being real, being 5 houses of old magic consolidated in one 11-year-old who was completely unimpressed. Harry felt it like a cold wind trying to push him backward. He planted himself and pushed forward. Behind him Hermione made a sharp sound. Neville said, "Harry, I'm fine," Harry said, and his voice was completely steady, and the magic came through the wand and through his hand and through everything he was, all 5 lines of it, and the fragment in the diadem tore loose with a sound that was not quite a sound, a frequency below hearing, a vibration that Harry felt in his teeth and his bones and the back of his skull where his own fragment sat, and there was a blinding white flash that wasn't light but was perceived like light. And then, silence. The diadem sat on the bust. The cold was gone. Harry lowered his wand. He breathed once, completely, and turned around. Hermione was staring at him with wide eyes and one hand pressed flat against her sternum, which she did when she was trying to stop her heart from going too fast. Neville was extremely pale but standing fully upright with his wand at the ready and his expression that of someone who had decided to be present for something and was absolutely being present for it. "It's done," Harry said. "What did you do?" Hermione said. "I'm not entirely sure," Harry said. "Something structural. The 5 inheritances together." He looked at the diadem. It was silver again. Clean. The wrongness entirely gone, replaced by something that felt the way a room felt when you opened the windows after a long time and the air moved through. "I think, when all 5 lines are acting together, they're not just additive. There's something else. A unified house magic," Hermione said, and her voice had the quality it got when she was looking at a thing academically while also being frightened by it. "Like, each founder put their specific magical character into the school, into Hogwarts itself. You have all 4 of those characters in you. Plus the Peveril line that predates all of them." She stared at him. "Harry. You're not just a lord of 5 houses. She stopped. "I'm a person," Harry said firmly. "Who happens to have 5 inheritances. Let's not make it stranger than it needs to be." Hermione looked at him for a moment. Then she laughed, a brief, slightly hysterical laugh that she covered with her hand. "Right," she said. "Yes. Fine." Neville said, "Can we leave?" "I would like to leave this room." They left the room. In the 7th-floor corridor, with the door fading back into blank stone behind them, Harry took a moment. The fragment in his own skull was different. Not quieter exactly, but more present, as though the destruction of the diadem's fragment had disturbed it. The way you disturbed a sleeping person by making noise in the same room, not awake, not active, but no longer fully insensible. "He'll feel that," Harry said. "Voldemort. Through Quirrell." He looked at the corridor, empty, quiet, the evening castle going about its business 2 floors below. "We should go." They went to Dumbledore's office. Snape and Dumbledore were both there. The office felt smaller with 4 people in it and both of them standing, Snape by the window, Dumbledore behind his desk, and a quality in the air of 2 people who had been having a significant conversation and had reached a difficult point in it. The Phoenix regarded the newcomers with its characteristic calm. The portraits of previous headmasters were attentive without pretending otherwise. Harry told them what had happened in the room. Briefly, factually, the way he always delivered information. He watched both of them process it, Dumbledore with the expression of a man encountering evidence that changed his model significantly, Snape with the particular contained attention he brought to things he was genuinely surprised by. The combined inheritance, Dumbledore said quietly. All five, Harry said. Snape turned from the window. His expression was doing the complicated thing it did when he was revising something significant. You destroyed a Horcrux, he said. As an 11-year-old. Without a spell. I don't know what category the magic falls into, Harry said. It wasn't a standard cast. He paused. I'd like to understand it better. But that's for later. He looked at both of them. The fragment in me is disturbed. Less dormant than it was. I think we need to do the extraction now, tonight, while it's been recently disrupted rather than waiting for it to settle back. Snape looked at Dumbledore. Something passed between them, the compressed communication of two people who had been working in proximity for a very long time and had developed a shorthand for it. The expurgatio process, Snape said. I've read the text. He had. Harry had known he would, had known, when he told Dumbledore to tell Snape everything, that Snape would go directly to the source material. It requires a willing activation from the host. I know, Harry said. It will be, I know, Harry said again. Can you do it? Snape looked at him with the complex expression that lived behind the professional mask, the one Harry had been seeing more often as the weeks passed and the mask grew less automatic around him. Yes, he said. The headmaster and I can perform it together. The wording requires, I've memorized the protocol, Harry said. Tell me my part. Dumbledore produced a chair. Harry sat. Hermione and Neville moved to the back of the office, not dismissed, deliberately positioned where they could see and be there but not be in the way. Neville's steadiness was a presence in the room. Harry was grateful for it. Dumbledore and Snape took positions on either side of him. The phoenix shifted on its perch and made a low sound, not alarmed, something else. Attending. The activation phrase, Snape said. You say it clearly, with full intention. Not just the words. Harry nodded. The process will take whatever time it takes, Dumbledore said, with a gentleness that was fully real. We'll be here through all of it. I know, Harry said. I trust you to hold the containment. He paused. Both of you. He looked at Snape specifically when he said both. Snape looked back at him and something in his face went through the same involuntary motion Harry had seen when he told him about Lily's heritage, the thing that moved before it could be managed. Harry looked forward. He thought about the Peveril ward. The willing activation. His mother standing in a house in Godric's Hollow and choosing something completely, in full knowledge, without reservation. He understood her better now than he had in September. He'd understood her abstractly then, the love, the sacrifice, the protection. He understood her concretely now. Not the mythology. The person. The Ravenclaw heir who didn't know she was a Ravenclaw heir, who was brilliant and stubborn and had looked at something terrible and said not my child and had meant it with every particular specific thing she was. He said the activation phrase. What followed was the most intensely uncomfortable experience of Harry's life, and Harry had lived in a cupboard under a staircase for 10 years, which was an extensive baseline. It was not pain exactly, or it was pain in the way that a bone setting was pain, structural and necessary and horrible and not without a strange clarity. He was aware of Dumbledore and Snape's magic on either side of him, Dumbledore's like deep warm light, Snape's like precise cold silver, exactly complementary, exactly the right combination for the containment the text had described. He was aware of the fragment. It was, he had thought of it as passive for months, as dormant, as sleeping. It wasn't sleeping now. It was aware and it was old and it was terrible in the specific way of something that had been a person and was no longer a person, had carved away its own humanity deliberately, one choice at a time, until what remained was this, furious and cold and completely without anything that recognized another person as real. Harry looked at it and felt none of its fury reflected back in himself. He felt something else instead. Grief, perhaps. The specific grief for things that could have been different and weren't. Then he let it go. The extraction was like pulling something out of deep water, resistance, drag, the sense that the water was trying to hold on to what it had, and then release, sudden and complete, and the thing was out of the water and in the air and then gone, contained and dispersed by Dumbledore and Snape in the same moment. Silence. Harry sat in the chair in Dumbledore's office and breathed. The pressure at the back of his skull, the pressure he'd had since before he could remember, the constant low presence that he'd learned to ignore so completely that he'd stopped knowing it was there, was gone. The absence of it was extraordinary. It was like being handed back a silence you hadn't known was missing. Like a ringing in the ears stopping. Like stepping out of a noise and into a clear night and realizing how loud everything had been. He sat with it for a moment. Just the room, and the fire, and Dumbledore and Snape on either side of him, and Hermione making a small sound from the back of the office that she was definitely not going to acknowledge as crying, and Neville standing beside her with the expression of someone who has witnessed something important and is holding it carefully. Then Harry said, "Well." He heard Snape make the dry involuntary sound that was his laugh. Dumbledore said, very quietly, "How do you feel?" Harry thought about it honestly. "Myself," he said. "Completely myself. Which I didn't realize I wasn't, before." He paused. "Is it completely gone?" "Yes," Snape said, with the certainty of someone who had maintained absolute precision throughout and was confident in the result. "The fragment is dispersed. There is nothing remaining." He paused. "Your scar may still be there. The wound is old." "That's fine," Harry said. "The scar was mine. It's a record." He stood up. His legs were steady. He looked at the Sword of Gryffindor on the wall behind Dumbledore's desk. It was silver and ruby-hilted and it caught the fire's light and threw it back, and Harry looked at it and thought about the stool in the Great Hall and the hat's voice inside his skull and the word claim and the choice he'd made. "I'd like it back," Harry said to Dumbledore. "The sword. It's mine. You've had the Gringotts notification for 6 weeks." Dumbledore looked at the sword and then at Harry and stood aside. Harry walked around the desk and took the Sword of Gryffindor off the wall. It was heavier than he'd expected, and warmer. It had been sitting near the fire and the metal had absorbed it, and the grip felt right in his hand in the way that things felt right when they were actually yours rather than borrowed or offered or claimed on someone else's behalf. The rubies in the hilt caught the light and the blade was clean and sharp and extremely, precisely itself. He turned it in his hand once. Then he held it at his side. "I'll need a scabbard," he said. "I'll have one sent to your dormitory tomorrow," Dumbledore said. And then, because he was Dumbledore and some things about him were genuine regardless of everything else, "You look like a Gryffindor." "I look like all 5, Harry said. He turned to the room, Snape, Hermione, Neville, the attentive portraits, the phoenix watching calmly from its perch. He thought about the evening. The diadem. The extraction. And underneath both of those, the 30-day window long past, the ministry notification received and processed, the wizarding world now aware that an 11-year-old first year at Hogwarts simultaneously held 5 ancient lordships and had already filed all the paperwork. He thought about Lucius Malfoy coming in 3 weeks. He thought about the Wisengamot seats and what to do with them. About his mother's story needing to be told correctly. About Quirrell, who was still in the building and who would know by now that the diadem's fragment was gone and who would be reporting that to Voldemort, and Voldemort was going to have to decide what to do with the information that Harry Potter had destroyed one of his Horcruxes at 11 years old on a Friday evening with no particular drama. He thought about everything that was still unresolved and felt, not at all troubled by it, something that was simply the open territory of what came next. "The Quirrell situation," Harry said to Dumbledore. "I'll address it this evening," Dumbledore said. There was something in his tone, a decision that had been made, finally, without the hedging that had been in it all term. He will not be here by Monday. Good, Harry said. He looked at Snape. Thank you. For the extraction. And for the term, generally. Snape looked at him with the expression that was too complicated to name. He said, your mother would have found this entire situation simultaneously infuriating and deeply satisfying. Yes, Harry said. I think so too. He sheathed the sword under his arm, no scabbard yet, improvised, and picked up his bag and looked at Hermione and Neville. Hermione had her expression fully controlled again, the academic neutrality restored, but her eyes were bright. 3 more weeks of term, she said. Exams. We're going to be fine on exams, Harry said. I know we are, she said. I just wanted to say something normal. Neville laughed, suddenly and freely, the laugh that had started on the boat as a small sound and had grown over the term into something full and genuine. Can we go to dinner? I'm absolutely starving and I feel like we should eat something after all of that. Yes, Harry said. Dinner. They left the office. The moving staircase took them down through the castle's warm interior, the stone walls and the torchlight and the portraits and the 7 centuries of magic that was, in some real sense, partly his, and Harry carried the Sword of Gryffindor under his arm through Hogwarts and no one stopped him and no one would have dared and he wasn't hiding it. The Great Hall was in its late Friday mode, relaxed and loud, end-of-week energy, the enchanted ceiling showing stars and the thin early December moon. Harry walked to the Slytherin table and sat down and set the sword against the bench beside him and started filling his plate. Theo looked at the sword. He looked at Harry. He looked at the sword again. That's the Sword of Gryffindor, he said. Yes, Harry said. You're carrying it through the Great Hall and sitting at the Slytherin table. Yes, Harry said. Right, Theo said, and went back to his dinner. Blaise looked at the sword with the precise, cataloguing attention he brought to interesting developments and said nothing at all, which was a form of acknowledgement. Daphne raised an eyebrow a controlled fraction and went back to her food. Draco stared at the sword for a solid 10 seconds. Then he looked at Harry. Then he stared at the sword again. Then he said, explain. Lord Gryffindor's sword, Harry said. Belongs to me. I went and got it. Draco stared. You went to Dumbledore's office and took it off the wall. He let me, Harry said. It was mine. Draco stopped. Restarted. It has been in that office for 100 years. It was still mine, Harry said pleasantly. Draco looked at the sword. He looked at Harry. He performed a rapid internal calculation that Harry could almost watch happening in real time, and then he smiled, the real one, brief and genuine, and shook his head and said, my father is going to have an absolutely spectacular reaction to you. I'm looking forward to it, Harry said. The hall went on around them, noise and warmth and the comfortable ordinary life of the school, which continued regardless of what had happened this evening, which did not know and did not need to know that an 11-year-old in the Slytherin first years had spent the last 3 months dismantling the architecture of a mythology built around him and building something of his own in its place. Harry ate his dinner. Across the hall, Hermione was at the Gryffindor table with Neville beside her, and she met Harry's eye and gave him the fractional chin lift she used for acknowledgement, the one that meant, we did it, and I have already started making notes about what comes next. Harry returned it. The sword leaned against the bench beside him. The 5 lordships sat in him settled and sure. The fragment was gone, that extraordinary new silence, still new enough to notice, the complete absence of a weight he'd carried his whole life. He was 11 years old. He held the heritage of 5 ancient houses, the oldest magic in Britain, and a problem set that stretched comfortably across the next 6 years. He found, looking at all of it, that he was completely untroubled. Some things were still broken and some things still needed fixing and some people were still operating from positions that needed revising and Voldemort still existed in some fragmented and diminished form and Lucius Malfoy was coming in 3 weeks and the Wizengamot was a project that would take most of the next year and there was still so much he didn't know. But the foundation was laid. The paperwork was signed. The sword was in his hand. He was Harry Potter. No subtitle required. He ate his shepherd's pie and thought about what came next, and felt, for the first time in his life, not as a temporary reprieve, not as the quiet between anxieties, but as a simple and permanent baseline fact, free.